Chapter 11:17. Su Fengyan raised his head to look at the old man. Wang Xianji was far from dead. He did not have a resentful expression. He just quietly lowered his head to look at the young man. It was as if the whole world was stagnant. Wang Xianji finally closed his eyes. The scattered qi condensed into another Wang Xianji and floated to the ground. Along with the wind, he flew past the old man's illusory figure. Su Fengyan calmly said, "You win." Two pillars of heaven covered with ancient golden seal characters slowly hung down in the west. Obviously, this Wang Xianji who was scattered but his spirit gathered, although he no longer had the strength to kill Su Fengyan, but the gate of heaven was already open, he could still leave if he wanted to. When Wang Xianji passed through the gate of heaven and looked down on the world with the posture of an immortal, with the old man's unruly behavior, how would Su Fengyan, who had nowhere to hide, live? Wang Xianji did not pay attention to Su Fengyan, as well as the two uninvited guests that appeared in the corner of his eyes. A man stopped his horse but raised his hand to retrieve the spear. The other androgynous handsome young man retrieved the embroidered winter-spring thunder double blades. The old man walked towards the gate of heaven, but did not step through it. Instead, he stood with his hands behind his back, smiled and said, "There is no meaning." Wang Xianji turned around, looked to the east and said in a low voice, "Jianghu, fight the tide for 10 years. The old man then shifted his gaze to the north, indifferently said, "You groom, you go to the ice fields of the extreme north." Finally Wang Xianji stared at the young shepherd who stumbled a mile away, smiled and said, "I have some fate with this old man." The swordsman of Martial Emperor City, Lu Huang, was a step late, tightly gripping the hilt of the Bodhisattva barbarian sword, his eyes bloodshot. Lu Huang took off the scabbard, knelt on the ground, inserted the ancient sword into the ground beside him, kowtowed heavily, choking with sobs. Disciple Lu Huang respectfully sends off master. Wang Xianji finally looked at this disciple, ordered, "Wait for master's soul to disperse. You don't need to take revenge, just bury master's bones at the top of Kunlun Mountain." Lu Huang buried his face in the rough sand and didn't make a sound. Wang Xianji didn't care about this disciple's stubbornness. She turned her head and looked at the young king who seemed to have suddenly gained wealth and lost all his family assets. She revealed a knowing smile for the first time and said, "It is said that there is no second place in martial arts. You finally won against this old man, but there is no first place. This old man feels a little unworthy for you." Su Fengyan replied, "I still have some skills left that can support me on a trip to Mount Longhu. These few years of practicing martial arts can be considered as drawing water with a bamboo basket. In the future our enemies should meet in court and on the battlefield." Wang Xianji nodded and said, "A person who defeated this old man should have this kind of bearing." When Lu Huang was at the edge of the battlefield, Huang Sanjia and Miss Hehe also came over. After scheming against Su Fengyan and Wang Xianji, Huang Longshi did not have a complacent expression. The elder held the little girl's hand and said to Wang Xianji with a sneer, "You can't stop the Son of Heaven's anger from killing 1,000,000 people, so you want to do everything you can to let the later generation have a chance to fight against the former. But you don't know that everyone has their own life. It's not your turn to blindly control this. Heart. In the future there will be no difference between generals and generals. The emperor's throne will take turns. Not to mention ordinary scholars, even peddlers and soldiers can sit and enjoy. The less immortals there are in Jianghu, the more chivalrous the spirit is. Wang Xianji, what's wrong with the Jianghu having less immortals flying around? There will be chivalrous people supporting Jianghu. There will be no ascension. But the Jianghu's origin isn't in the sky, so naturally it won't die." Wang Xianji smiled and said, "Good." Wang Xianji looked around and retracted her gaze, murmuring, "If so, then this old man won't stay in Jianghu in vain." Wang Xianji lightly shouted. Her soul split into 3 and turned into a rainbow and left. The magnificent divine gate gradually dissipated. Wang Xianji didn't ascend, reincarnate, or live an ignoble life, but generously gave 3 opportunities to the Jianghu in the future. One went to the faraway Eastern Sea Martial Emperor City, one went to the faraway Grand P City, and the last one went to the nearby shepherd child. Lu Huang abandoned his long sword and walked empty-handed to his master's corpse on the ground. He gently carried it on his back and walked further and further north. Huang Longshi held his daughter's hand and walked towards the east. There's a beginning and an end. After this old man dies, remember to find this old man's daughter and take good care of her. Bai Hu wore the embroidered winter-spring thunder, walked to Su Fengyan and asked, "You're going to Mount Longhu?" Su Fengyan nodded and asked, "Then what about you?" Bai Hu smiled and said, "I don't have the habit of owing debts. Since you killed Wang Xinji for me, then I'll try to kill Tuoba Bodhisattva. Su Fengyan whispered, don't die. Bai Hu smiled and dismissed it. Su Fengyan said to Su Yanbing, Uncle Su, please bring that child back. I plan to take him as my disciple. Su Yanbing nodded and rode north with his spear. He found the skinny shepherd boy who fainted on the ground because he couldn't bear the burden. Mount Longhu. A middle-aged Taoist was fishing by the deep pool. The purple bamboo fishing rod had no hook or bait. A green leaf was floating in front of him. The Taoist Zhao Huangchao occasionally stared at the wandering veins in the leaf and occasionally raised his hand to calculate the fate. At first, it was mostly within the framework. Zhao Huangchao's expression was relaxed. The veins in the leaf turned bright and dark a few times. The Taoist who cultivated in seclusion frowned but didn't turn pale. Until the leaf turned yellow in an instant and was cut off along one of the veins. Zhao Huangchao was speechless. He looked at the two pieces of the leaf floating on the deep green pool. His face was pale. Zhao Huangchao suddenly raised his head and looked towards the northwest. He said angrily, Old man Wang is useless. A red rainbow smashed into the deep pool. Zhao Huangchao decisively threw away the fishing rod and rushed up the mountain. He wanted to climb over the mountain and rush north. He wanted to rush to the Earth Lung Mountain where he had raised an evil dragon in the number 1 paradise of Taoism. The guest from afar knocked away most of the water in the bottomless pool. It was as if a huge green lotus had bloomed in Mount Longhu. Zhao Huangchao stepped on the canopy of the towering ancient trees as if he was walking on flat ground. His body leaned forward and his Taoist robe fluttered in the wind. The great Taoist master rode the wind. However, a cold killing intent enveloped his back. Knowing that things were not going well, Zhao Huangchao made a gesture with his fingers and was about to recite the word formation. That would turn out to be a prophecy when one of his legs was grabbed by the monster behind him whose face he had yet to see clearly. The visitor from Mount Longhu sneered, Go back. In the end, Zhao Huangchao's body was lifted high and then thrown into the deep pool where the water was rippling. The Taoist priest didn't have time to dissipate the force. His back crashed into the water. The visitor was determined to beat him up. He landed in the pool almost at the same time as Zhao Huangchao. He appeared beside the Taoist priest and pressed the Taoist priest's head down with his 5 fingers like hooks. One standing and one lying down, they broke through the water and fell into the pool together. In the blink of an eye, Zhao Huangchao's head and back crashed into a blue stone that suddenly appeared at the bottom of the pool. The blue stone instantly shattered. The person raised his arms slightly and still grabbed the Taoist priest's head. He then slammed it into the stone wall on the side of the deep pool. Zhao Huangchao seemed to have been nailed into the stone wall. The person was still unwilling to give up. His 5 fingers retracted and then pushed again. This repeated repeatedly. The Taoist priest's head crashed into the stone wall again and again like a bell. No less than 100 dull and terrifying sounds of the bell rang in Mount Longhu. The entire pool of water boiled and then turned into a cloud of white mist. The truth came to light. The pool was empty. The Taoist priest Zhao Huangchao's skull and spine were shattered. He couldn't say a word from the beginning to the end. He was dead. Chapter 11:18. With such a big movement under the nose of the Taoist master mansion, the Taoist masters of Longhu Mountain arrived one after another. However, there were no nobles dressed in yellow or purple. The 3 Taoists who arrived first were not old. For the Taoists who could live forever in the eyes of the common people, this age was indeed not old. Like Mr. White Lotus, the 3 of them were outsiders of the Taoist ancestral court, but their cultivation was very high. They were Zhang Wenhan, Xue Solar, and Qin Kuanyong. After the father and son Taoist master mansion ascended together, the prestige of the Taoist master mansion declined day by day. These Taoists vaguely showed signs of supporting half of the Longhu Mountain. Among the 3 of them, Qin Kuanyong was the last to arrive. He saw 2 Taoists standing far away from the nameless deep pool. Beside the pool, a young man who looked like an aristocratic family squatted and seemed to be washing his blood-stained clothes. Qin Kuanyong was the most knowledgeable among the 3, but his cultivation was the lowest. He did not dare to be rash. Stepping on the wet ground soaked by the pool water, he slowly walked to Xue Solar who had been on the same mountain for more than 10 years. Xue Solar said softly, You guessed right. There was indeed a senior who died here. When I arrived, the senior tried to fly to the Earth Lung Mountain in the north, but he was stopped by the young man. Qin Kuanyong was flabbergasted. Without caring about etiquette, he interrupted the conversation of his longtime acquaintance and asked emotionally, according to the auspicious fortune treasure book, flying into the rainbow is 1 level lower than flying into the sky by riding a dragon, but it's much more superior than riding a crane. Even if that secluded senior didn't fly into the sky, even if you and I joined hands, we still wouldn't be able to stop him. Xue Solar looked strange and carefully said, "It was a black rainbow that rose from the bottom of the deep pool. It rose several feet from the surface of the pool, but it was torn back by the man's bare hands. It was almost completely smashed. Only about an inch wide and a foot-long black rainbow was left. It fled to the snow field." Qin Kuanyong frowned. The black rainbow was definitely not an auspicious sign. It was accompanied by many bad prophecies in the ancient books. Zhang Wenhan, who was some distance away from Qin Kuanyong and Xue Solar, finally asked, "I am Zhang Wenhan of Longhu Mountain. May I ask if you are Prince Liang?" The young man stood up and washed most of the blood on his body. He nodded and asked with a smile, "Xianxia is not on the mountain?" Zhang Wenhan looked complicated. He took a deep breath and took a step forward, and said, "If your highness goes down the mountain now, I can personally lead the way for your highness. If you go up the mountain, I will be overconfident." "You." Su Fengyin, who had already eliminated Zhao Huangqiao, smiled, "There's no need to send me off. Send my regards to old perfected Zhao Shituan on my behalf." Zhang Wenhan felt as if a heavy burden had been lifted from his shoulders. He bowed deeply. "I will definitely pass on your message, Your Highness." Such wording seemed to be respectful, but in fact, it was no different from an eviction order. However, the notorious young king didn't seem to care and walked straight down the mountain. Among the three of them, Xue Solar was the most straightforward. He had a bad impression of the Prince of Northern Liang, who had provoked Longhu Mountain. Even though he had seen how the Prince of Northern Liang ended the fight with his own eyes, he still had his own calculations. Observing the situation, he knew that the young Prince of Northern Liang was already weak. Xue Solar didn't want to miss this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. He didn't mean that he had to severely injure the powerful Prince of Northern Liang, but he wanted to avenge Longhu Mountain. He couldn't let Su Fengyin come and go as he pleased. Did he think that just because Immortal Qi Xuanzhen was no longer in charge of the demon-slaying platform, anyone could come and show off here? So Xue Solar took a step to the side and blocked Su Fengyin's path down the mountain. Then, without waiting for Zhang Wenhan, who was said to be only one step away from the finger-profound realm, to warn him, Qin Kuanyong saw the Duke of Northern Liang disappear in a flash. Then Xue Daoyou's body was lifted off the ground. It was as if his head was pierced by an arrow. He was almost upside down when his head touched the ground, and then he fell limply to the ground. Zhang Wenhan hurriedly rushed to Xue Solar's side and squatted down, slowly instilling a long breath into him, trying to protect his turbulent heart. Qin Kuanyong found that Xue Solar's face was as pale as gold paper, and his complexion was extremely poor. Zhang Wenhan angrily said in a stern voice, "The whole world knows that Wang Xianji wants to fight to the death with this person. Since Su Fengyin can come to Mount Longhu, not to mention that he defeated Wang Xianji gave him his last battle in the mortal world. It can be seen that even if he came to Mount Longhu to seek revenge before the battle, he is not someone you and I can belittle. If we annoy this person and he is driven to desperation, he will break into the Taoist master's residence and go on a rampage, destroying the foundation of Mount Longhu. The three of us are not of the same surname, so how can we bear the responsibility?" Some of the Taoists who were of lower seniority gradually gathered around, and there were also a few Taoists who were yellow and purple. Seeing this scene, they were somewhat at a loss. Zhang Wenhan did not explain anything, and only asked Qin Kuanyong to report the details to the Taoist master's residence on the mountain. He then carried Xue Solar to a secluded place to treat his injuries. If he was unlucky and fell ill, it was destined to affect his Taoist root. On the mountain, people of different surnames had always been united. It was not easy to have a new atmosphere, and they should have climbed the mountain together. Su Fengyin went down Mount Longhu and then climbed up Mount Hui. Today the Xinyuan family was like a hot knife through butter in Jianghu. The purple-clothed woman first reached the top of the martial arts world, and became the first female martial arts chief in hundreds of years. Later, she intercepted Wang Xianji, which was a blessing in disguise. Her cultivation was temporarily damaged, but in the more important matter of the realm, she went one step further, causing Mount Hui to become more and more crowded. At the mountain gate's archway where one had to pass to go to Bull Mound and Snow Plateau, there was a newly erected sword comprehension stele, which was somewhat similar to the city wall of Martial Emperor City. If the challenger lost, he would have to leave behind his weapon and leave the mountain. Chapter 11:19. Su Fengyin walked unhurriedly on the mountain path. There were many strange people in Jianghu, so he was not too eye-catching. Beside him was a coquettish woman who deliberately wore a big white fox fur coat at the end of spring. In front of him, there was a bald man who dragged a huge horse-chopping sword up the mountain. Su Fengnian went up the mountain this time mainly to prevent the cunning Zhao Huangqiao, who had more than 3 burrows, from having a backup plan. That streak of black light that escaped the net eventually fell into the missing moon tower on the Great Snow Plateau. Although Zhao Huangqiao was undoubtedly dead and could not rise from the ashes, Su Fengnian had to be careful and personally make sure that he turned into ashes. Moreover, he wanted to make a deal with Shenyuan Qingfeng. Su Fengnian had fought 2 battles in a row. Not to mention Wang Xinji, Zhao Huangqiao was also an Earth Immortal, and he had killed 2 people in a row. It was no wonder that Xue Zhili of Mount Longhu thought that he was a pushover. Su Fengnian now only had the body of a tall tree, and his soul and spirit were in a mess. The former could not be obtained anymore, but the latter was like a dried-up pond in a dry season. As long as the pond was still there would be no water for a short period of time. However, as long as there was a few rains, there was still hope that the pond would be filled up. This was also the unique insight that Su Fengnian had comprehended after successively entering the false realm. If the true realm was a piece of Shen paper, then the false realm would be the lower layer of Shen paper. Right now, even though Su Fengnian was severely injured, he still managed to surpass Wang Xinji and kill Zhao Huangqiao. The heart qi that he had unintentionally gathered after he killed Zhao Huangqiao could be said to be majestic, and it led Su Fengnian to a certain place. The 4 words, "Seal the mountain and leave the guests," suddenly came from the snowy plains and quickly spread throughout Mount Hui. Countless people of the martial arts world who came because of the fame walked down the mountain while cursing. Some of the guests and heroines who walked halfway down the mountain were also puzzled, but they were still sincerely afraid of the arrogance of the purple dress of Mount Hui, so they turned around and left one after another. Everyone was guessing whether there was a great change in Mount Hui. In the beginning, many people of Jianghu still hoped that there was an expert who could drag Shenyuan Qingfeng down from the Alliance Lord's throne. Later, they felt that although a woman was riding on top of the entire Jianghu, she was indeed very skillful and was rumored to be extremely beautiful. Wearing a purple dress that could topple the world did not seem to be bad, and it was quite a beautiful thing to talk about. As time passed, they instead thought that the woman could be even more superior, and it would be best if she could become the world's #1. In the eyes of the well-informed people of Liang Jianghu, once Wang Xinji left the Eastern Sea Martial Emperor city, that fame-seeking #6 in the world would definitely be dead. There was no doubt about this. However, old monster Wang's ascension was also a matter of certainty. Liang Jianghu was very clear that for a whole 60 years, Jianghu was Wang Xinji and Wang Xinji was Jianghu. No one could imagine how Jianghu would be without Wang Xinji. Wang Xinji was the undisputed #1 in the world. Therefore, it was natural for Jianghu to divide the world based on whether Wang Xinji left the human world or not. Perhaps it was because the master of the Shenyuan family had personally given the order, but many of the high-ranking foreign dignitaries of Mount Hui personally came out with cold faces and chased away the visitors. Some of the Jianghu men and women who relied on their skills and background were not willing to be treated so arrogantly at first, but in the end, they all suffered in the hands of the chief foreign dignitaries, Huang Fangfua. Only then did they leave the mountain with their tails between their legs. Su Fengnian went against the flow of people and attracted some playful glances. Most of them thought he was a fearless Jianghu fledgling. Only the last few people who left the archway of the mountain gate saw a man in purple standing under the archway in the distance. For the first time he actually took the posture of going out to welcome guests. Shenyuan Qingfeng stood on the first step inside the mountain gate and stared at the master of Bailiang, who could be considered an old acquaintance. Others did not know the truth, but she could somewhat guess. Moreover, someone had just told her the truth. She calmly said, "Don't worry. That Taoist is already dead. As for why he came to Mount Hui before he died, if you want to know the answer, you can take advantage of the situation and fight with me. I'll only tell you if I lose." Su Fengnian leaned against the jade pillar of the archway and looked at the magnificent scenery outside the mountain with his hands folded in his sleeves. He sneered, "You really are a shrewd businessman. If you win against me, you'll undoubtedly be the #1 in the world. In the future, who would dare to fight with you for the position of Wulin Alliance head?" Shenyuan Qingfeng looked at his somewhat hunched back and did not say anything for a long time. Then, she lifted the corner of her dress and sat down on the steps. She asked, "How did you do it?" Su Fengnian's back slid against the pillar and he also sat down on the ground. He let out a long breath and finally had a chance to breathe. He thought to himself that this was probably what they meant by, "as if a lifetime had passed." Shenyuan Qingfeng suddenly said something out of the blue. "There used to be a painting on Mount Hui that looked a lot like you. I also heard that you looked a lot like that female sword immortal mother of yours. I finally understood something and it made me laugh for several days. The gloomy smile on Xinyuan Qingfeng's face was particularly lush. Su Fengyan said calmly, your father and mother's generation have already cleared up their own mess. If you insist on getting involved, I don't mind sending you on your way. Xinyuan Qingfeng laughed. You're just a paper tiger. You still dare to scare people? Su Fengyan frowned and dismissed the idea of making that deal. He stood up and turned to glance at her. In the future you should pay more attention to Jianghu fooding of Martial Emperor City and that groom you who went to the north. Wang Xianxia had high hopes for them and gave them each a portion of fate energy before she died. Xinyuan Qingfeng remained silent. Su Fengyan hesitated for a moment, then said, Mount Longhu has probably already secretly switched allegiance to the crown prince of Yanqi, Jianghu. Even if the celestial master residence does not have the courage, that white lotus will still bet on Jianghu. If you dare to make a bet, Jianghu is a good choice. In the future, the Jianghu will become more and more inseparable from the imperial court. Xinyuan Qingfeng remained expressionless. Su Fengyan went down the mountain twice in a day. He went to Martial Emperor City alone. Chapter 11:20. There was not a soul in the carriage. The coachman was a young man dressed in plain clothes. If he were the son of an official, based on his appearance and if he could write well, he would most likely have a smooth career in the officialdom. It was a pity that he was from a lowly family who was not allowed to study for the imperial examinations. Li Yang reorganized the provinces and established the roads. In terms of the various roads and territories, the king of Yanqi oversaw the southern border, which was the most vast. The Guangling Road, which the vassal King Zhao Yi had his eyes on, was close behind. However, the degree of richness of the two could not be compared. Half of the world's taxes came from Guangling, which was not a lie. It was just that Guangling Road was not peaceful at the moment. In the past, there were still people who could rely on their connections to pass through the post house. However, now that a storm was coming, it was obvious that a war was imminent. The dozen or so main post house roads around Guangling Road were abnormally strict. They did not allow anyone other than soldiers to invade. Once discovered, they would be exiled from the Tuliao. At the border of Guangling Road, there were many checkpoints with swords and halberds. One could only leave but not enter. It was obvious that the rebels of West Chu were the first to fortify their walls. Later, the matter of clearing the wilderness was handed over to Li Yang in order to catch a turtle in a jar. Several vassal kings carrying Jingnan's banners were stationed at the border. Most of them cherished their feathers, so the soldiers under their command did not violate the law. However, some of the second and third class generals who held little military power but were unable to participate in the war immediately smelled the fishy smell. Horses would not grow fat without night's grass. Around the border, there were many bandits fishing in troubled waters. It was true that there were a few rebellious acts, but it was absolutely not as serious as reported by the local government. As a result, first there was a small-scale rebellion, and then there was the chaotic scene of bandits passing through like a comb. Immediately after that, the soldiers who were suppressing the bandits heard the news and moved into action. This was the true meaning of soldiers passing through like a string of beehives, causing many wealthy families who had the strength to complain incessantly. In the end, even the envious heads of the provincial and county governments suddenly became bold. They did not care about their table manners and wantonly sent their trusted aides and advisors to the aristocratic families outside of their in-laws. Nominally, they were distributing protective talismans, promising that when the bandits roamed, the government would definitely send troops to protect the border and the people. Nobody was stupid, so they could only obediently squeeze out a smile and send boxes of gold and silver as a means of averting disaster. Nowadays, even the banknotes of the big money houses with roots in the capital were useless. As long as it was real gold and silver, the latter could only resentfully curse the officials in private. If he wanted to get to Eastern Sea's Martial Emperor City, he would have to go through Guangling Road and take the easternmost Wild Road. Su Fengyan, who had become a coachman, had already crossed the border. Along the way he had seen several robbers taking advantage of the chaos to make money, all of which happened in the area between Dechu and Li Yang's prince of Guangling Zhao Yi. Among them there was a group of 30 robbers, each of them riding a horse and wearing armor. Although most of their weapons were rusty, they were undoubtedly weapons from the old Guangling Road's armory. It was enough to show how the Li Yang officials who had come from outside did not pay attention to the outside world and only cared about the wealth of the people. However, when Su Fengyan arrived at the east, the situation began to improve. At first he walked on foot, but later on he encountered a group of fierce bandits who were chasing a wealthy family far away from trouble. At that time, more than a dozen young and strong guards were killed. Su Fengyin killed a few bandits who were about to attack the women and children, and a few more who were out of their minds. However, he did not chase the bandits down and let them escape. At that time, a young man who was wearing a scholar's robe who was about to kill his savior, stared at Su Fengyin gloomily and said that he was willing to pay 100 jin of gold to kill all the bandits and avenge his family. Su Fengyin ignored him. The young man was about 13 or 14 years old and was a juror of the imperial court, but he had not yet passed the examination. He was probably a local prodigy and was highly regarded by his family. They were all eagerly waiting for him to bring glory to their family, so it was inevitable that he developed a condescending arrogance. When the young man saw that this young man who traveled in Jianghu was not chivalrous and had suffered a tragedy himself, he did not cover his mouth and said a few very unpleasant words. Su Fengyin was too lazy to argue with a child and continued on his way. However, the old man of this small noble family was kind and quickly came forward to reprimand his eldest grandson's rudeness. He gave him a carriage as a gesture of gratitude and carefully gave him a small stack of silver notes. The old man originally wanted Su Fengyin to help escort him to a safer place further south, but after testing him, he did not force him. In fact, the carriage and the 300 to 400 taels of silver were just worldly possessions. Moreover, so many guards who acted as coachmen had died, so some carriages had become burdens and had to be abandoned. Su Fengyin did not refuse, which was why he had what he had now. Afterwards, there were some ignorant water bandits who came forward to harass him, but they were all easily chased away. This made the absent-minded Su Fengyin think of many old people, such as the large group of old and young from Mount Qingqing, who did not look like bandits at all. As for the Jianghu chivalrous men, he remembered He Zhu who rode a horse to the spring god lake to deliver a message to Miss Hehe. Su Fengyin felt that he had been to Jianghu several times and had seen many so-called chivalrous women, but no matter how he counted them, perhaps only Lu Nerong from the Fish Dragon Gang and Zhou Qinghu, whom he met along the way when he met great ancestor Gu, were more in line with his impression of chivalrous women in his mind. Their kung fu was mediocre, and their appearances could not be considered stunning. If he had met them earlier, they were far from the Jianghu fairies that he had envisioned when he was a teenager. When he was young, he always thought that chivalrous women were carved from the same mold, nothing more than white clothes fluttering in the wind, otherworldly. He felt that they would not need to eat, drink, defecate, or fart for the rest of their lives. Now, Su Fengyin would definitely not be so naive as to take things for granted. At first, Su Fengyin insisted that the restoration of West Chu was nothing more than Chao Changqing going against the current, and that he was destined to be unable to win the general trend of the world. He could only temporarily occupy a remote corner, unable to make a sound by himself. Then he would be reduced to a new generation of young and strong generals in Liang with little merit, and help the old generals of the spring and autumn period leave the imperial court. However, along the way he had seen many of the older generation of West Chu survivors who had endured humiliation for more than 20 years. For the time being they still kept their mouths shut. But Su Fengyin knew that the more they endured, the more the Liang officers and soldiers would exploit them. With Chao Changqing as the backbone of New Chu, it might not be as vulnerable as it seemed. Chapter 11:21. Once the fire and smoke of war started, many people would die, but it was destined that a small group of people would emerge and eventually firmly occupy a place in the annals of history. Now the key point was whether West Chu or Liang had more people. Intuition told the Su Fengyin that the latter had more people, but West Chu had always produced great talents since ancient times. Once they made a name for themselves, they would amaze the world with a single brilliant feat. Perhaps one or two young talents would emerge who would inherit Chao Changqing's mantle. The carriage stopped temporarily at the northeastern border of Guangling Road. At this time, the entrances and exits around Guangling Road had been completely closed. This was the last hidden exit of Guangling Road. A lot of people with Jianghu background and connections had flooded into Wu City to take refuge. One of the vassal King Zhao Yi's trusted aides was guarding this place. Probably because he had received his master's instructions, he was not afraid of being impeached by the imperial censor and chose to turn a blind eye to it. Of course, if someone wanted to leave the country, it was impossible to do so without ruthlessly losing a layer of skin. Conservatively speaking, Zhao Yi's spring snow building had earned more than 2 million taels of silver in a short span of 20 years, not to mention the countless antiques, treasures, calligraphy and paintings, which were all being transported to the end of Guangling River by cart. There were probably 3,000 strong elite Zhao family's light cavalry guarding the place. Although the road here was crowded, it was not chaotic. As for the wealth of the family, as long as there was enough money, the young general of the spring snow building, Song Li, who had 3,000 cavalry, could even allow people to enter the courier road to hasten their journey. If there was not enough money, it was not a problem. As long as there were beautiful women in the family, they could offer them with both hands. Everyone in the Guangling path knew that the distinguished scholar Song Li was fond of women and did not like dead objects. No matter how valuable an object was, he would give it away as he wished. Only he was fond of collecting beautiful women. Song Li, who was not yet 30 years old, was not satisfied even when he was already drunk on the lap of a beauty. It was rumored that there were no less than 20 stunning beauties in his family. There were women from the imperial family of a fallen country who had wandered among the common people, young heroines from Jianghu sects, and even women from aristocratic families who were willing to have an affair for him. Among these women, there was no doubt that the most famous was Banana Deer, who was ranked 6th on the New Rouge ranking. This delicate woman could be said to have had a difficult life. Originally, she had passed through the hands of many people, but fortunately she was not labeled as a beautiful woman with a short life. Song Li's origins had always been unclear. He gave people the feeling that he had inexplicably become the new celebrity of the Guangling Path's important military location, the Spring Snow Building. However, after that, he had always been deeply trusted by the vassal king and was even close to His Royal Highness, Zhao Yuang. What was even more inconceivable was that Zhao Yuang, the grandson of the Zhao family with such a bad reputation, was able to remain calm in front of the beautiful women in Song Li's family. He was even able to respectfully address Banana Deer as sister-in-law. Furthermore, the Spring Snow Building was divided into 2 camps. Lu Xing, who had already entered the capital and been promoted, was in the same camp as Zhang Erbao and the other generals. He had always been at odds with the chief advisor, who had a bumpy career because of his ugly appearance. Song Li, on the other hand, was able to make friends with both sides. Su Fengnian stayed at an inconspicuous inn in the military town. The price had already increased by many times. It cost 30 taels of silver a day, and it was not even enough to stay in a second-class room. Furthermore, because there were so many people coming and going, even if the bedding was carelessly washed, one could smell a strong sour smell of sweat. The horse grass used to pull the carriage had to be charged separately. It was even more expensive than the meals of the guests staying at other places. However, still no one dared to complain. Su Fengnian's room was at the end of the corridor on the 2nd floor. It was narrow and dark. Along the way, the initial banknotes had to be converted into money and had long been used up. Afterwards, he had cut off some real gold and silver from a group of bandits, which was more or less enough to cover the cost of crossing the border. If Su Fengnian wanted to reach the ownerless Eastern Sea Martial Emperor city as soon as possible, it would be a piece of cake. However, the current timing was not right. If he wanted to truly succeed, it was better to go at the right time than to go at the right time. That way he would appear to be leisurely and carefree. Furthermore, he also wanted to take advantage of this period of time to take a few more glances at the people of West Chu. At dusk, Su Fengnian went downstairs to make do with dinner. After chewing and swallowing slowly, he ordered a pot of tea. The waiter said that it was this year's Spring God Lake new tea, but the tea in the cup was yellow and truly unbearable to look at. Inside the building, most of the guests were talking loudly. There was wine and tea. Su Fengnian discovered that there were almost no survivors of West Chu who had left their homes and headed north. After the spring and autumn period, the territory of Liang was vast. Because there were so many powerful vassals who had been given territories by the previous emperor, a lot of news, neither light nor heavy, was blocked by the region. However, there were still some things that interested the entire court. One person spread to 10 and 10 to 100. With the support of the relatively unobstructed post office, the news spread extremely quickly. For example, who was the top 3 in the court examination that appeared only once every 3 years? As for the martial arts and rouge reviews, there was no need to talk about them. However, in this month, there were only 2 things that the people of Liang looked forward to the most. One was when West Chu would rise in rebellion, and the other was when they would hear the news of the death of the young vassal of Beiliang. This news of death was, of course, great news. In the eyes of many people, even though Beiliang had the surname Su for more than 20 years, since the butcher Su Xiao was dead, they might as well give it to Qin Jibao, who had been the vassal for a period of time. Only then would everything be fine. In the eyes of the people, the new Liang prince was the scoundrel who occupied the magpie's nest. The king of Shu, Qin Jibao, could very well rule over 2 lands. The western front of Liang would be peaceful and peaceful. It was better than letting the prodigal Su Fengnian squander 300,000 cavalrymen for no reason. At this moment, everyone in the inn was discussing the second matter. After all, most of the people in the inn had a grassy atmosphere. As long as no one was implicated in the restoration of West Chu's country, it would not be a big deal. However, Wang Xinji, who had been given land without a single soldier, was an old monster who was called the Emperor, on the same level as the Emperor of the Zhao family. When they talked about this martial emperor, everyone was excited. In the inn, there was a table of guests with a different demeanor from the people of Jianghu. They were solemn and full of murderous intent. Most of them carried sabers of the same style. Anyone with a discerning eye could tell that this table belonged to a family of officials. Moreover, there were several retainers outside the inn with similar sabers. Their eyes were sharp, and they looked at everyone with the arrogance of a human looking at a dog. There were 3 men and 1 woman at the table. The woman lowered her head to eat and occasionally raised her head. Her appearance was ordinary, but she had a pair of spiritual eyes that made people forget the vulgarity. Especially when she looked around, it was enough to add a lot of color to her. Sitting beside her was a short and sturdy man in his 30s. The other 2 were carrying sabers, 1 old and 1 young. The old man was dressed in brocade. When he heard the boastful talk in the inn, he could not help but have a mocking expression. It was probably the expression of a person at the mouth of a well mocking a frog at the bottom of a well. Chapter 11:22. The young man rolled his eyes. He was wearing a Guangling saber wrapped in green silk. It was an imitation of Bailiang's 3rd-generation Su family saber. In terms of sharpness, it lost to the 1st-generation Su saber, and in terms of lightness, it lost to the 2nd-generation Su saber. Relatively speaking, it was most similar to the 3rd-generation Su saber. However, experts in the art of war knew that there was no such thing as the best saber in the world. There were only sabers that were most suitable for the soldiers of the family. Just like the soldiers in the northwest region of the dynasty, they were usually tall, had long arms and had outstanding physical strength. The soldiers of the Guangling path were inferior by a notch. This was a natural disadvantage that could not be changed by human resources. Regardless of whether Zhao Yi's reputation was good or bad, regardless of his skill in raising soldiers, he was at least one of the best among the vassals. Otherwise, no matter how thick-skinned this fat pig was, he would not be so shameless as to compete with Bailiang for the title of the world's best soldier. The Guangling path had the brand new armor and horses from the Liang dynasty, and had also quietly produced the newest Guangling saber. However, it had not yet been released on a large scale. The saber that the young man was wearing was a new saber that had not yet been made public. It would be named either the Spring Snow Saber or the Yellow Saber. It could be seen that Zhao Yi and the higher-ups of the Guangling path had high hopes for this saber. Just as the young man was about to speak, he was glared at by the man who did not wear a saber and did not look cultured. The young man immediately shut his mouth and sullenly drank his wine. It was really torturous to not be able to spit it out quickly. A retainer hurried into the inn and whispered into the ear of an ordinary-looking man. The man nodded, got up and walked straight to Su Fengyan's table. He said with a warm smile, "Young master, do you have any scholarly achievements? If you don't think it's too much, why don't you come work for me? Other than the women who are with me, I am always willing to give you anything." Su Fengyan asked, "Are you the general of the Spring Snow Building, Songli?" The man was stunned for a moment, as if he did not expect his identity to be seen through at a glance. The old man beside him had said that this lad's aura was not ordinary. He was either a first pin master who had hidden his strength or a chi master who focused more on his mind than his skills. The man could not help but click his tongue in wonder. It should be known that the old man who had always been arrogant in Guangling sect was as famous as the former number 1 of the southeast, Chai Qingshan. Chai Qingshan was not only a master of swordsmanship, but also the master of the Dongyue sword pool, Song Yanqing's martial uncle. Previously, he had relied on Zhao Yi for the sake of the sect's reputation and was reluctantly expelled by the Dongyue sword pool. Now that Song Yanqing had died, Chai Qingshan had been respectfully invited back to the sword pool to take charge of the affairs. In this way, the old retainer beside him was the well-deserved number 1 master of Guangling sect. The old man's name was very common, Wang Fu, but his saber skills had already reached perfection, even before Gu Jiantang. It could be said that Gu Jiantang was among the top 10 masters in the world, and never dropped out of the Wushu evaluation. He once stepped on the shoulders of this old man. The old man treasured the famous saber Kof bead, nicknamed Ghost Under the Wrist. In the past few Wushu evaluation sessions, people who used sabers all over the world all had the same understanding. Those who were truly proud of their saber skills could be counted with one's fingers. Among them, Gu Jiantang was ranked first. Mao Shulang, who was from Nanjiang but was still strong despite his age, had already completely sealed his saber. Coupled with the fact that he had no successor, he went to play with flowers, grass, fish and insects. Wang Fu unknowingly rose one rank, ranking before Yuan Zuozong of Beiliang, who had abandoned his saber for many years. The reason why this martial arts magnate did not enter the wushu evaluation was because his strength was slightly inferior, but more of the reason was that his martial arts ethics were extremely poor when he was young. When he encountered masters, he never knew what elegance was and used all kinds of sinister tricks. Years ago, in order to disturb the enemy's state of mind, he had people kidnap the enemy's wife and child before the battle. When he showed up, he threw the enemy's child's thumb. The enemy, who had always been calm and peaceful, lost the support of his state of mind and finally died under Wang Fu's saber. Even though he was old, he still did not act like an old man. His temperament was extremely devious. His bladesmanship was a dark path, and he was especially diligent in slaughtering those talented Jianghu juniors. He would kill almost everyone he saw. It had been many years since Wang Fu had the opportunity to pull out his cough bead blade. His original intention was to kill just now as a way to relieve his boredom. If he made a mistake and really encountered a troublesome master, with Guangling Path's top nobleman Song Li's 3,000 steel cavalry holding the fort, a lone Jianghu outsider would not be able to make any waves. When he was captured, he could be slowly used to sharpen his blade. In these years of relying on the imperial court, Wang Fu had done many such shady deeds. However, Song Li, who was recently conferred the title of General Hung Jiang by the imperial court, had his own plans. He did not go along with the intentions of this bladesmanship master. Instead, he had the intention to recruit him. It was not that he lacked valiant generals who could charge and break through enemy lines, but Song Li had always had a strong hobby of collecting beautiful women and Jianghu experts. Furthermore, he only treated them as flowers on brocade and not charcoal in the snow. Once he obtained them, he would be satisfied if he could take a few glances at them whenever he remembered them. Just like this time, when Wang Xinji announced that she would not return after leaving the city, Martial Emperor City lost its last life-saving talisman. Many Jianghu experts who could not see the light of day were recruited by Song Li, who was close to them. Song Li also did not care about their character. Song Li was all smiles, but Wang Fu did not dare to let his guard down. There were countless unorthodox methods in the Jianghu, and only God knew if the remnants of West Chu had their eyes on this newly conferred general of Hengjiang. If Song Li was schemed against, the spring snow building was in need of people. If he lost a trusted general before the war even started, the vassal King Zhao Yi would skin him alive and pull out his tendons. Everyone in the spring snow building knew that Song Li's current power and status was not only because he was capable, but also because Zhao Yi saw Song Li as a character who would share his fortune and misfortune. This point was even more important. The shrewd old spring snow building member Lu Xingxiang might not be without resentment. Su Fengyan glanced at the ghost under the wrist Wang Fu, who was holding his breath in concentration, and quickly retracted his gaze. Song Li waited for a moment and did not receive a reply. He laughed at himself and did not hide his regret. He slowly said, "I am just a small general. Since I am not able to enter young master's discerning eyes, I hope that when we meet again, you and I can have a good drink. I still have some urgent matters to attend to, so I will not disturb young master's tea time. In the future, as long as young master travels the Jianghu and the Guangling Road, no matter if it is a big or small matter, you just need someone to send a message to your residence. I will definitely be there." Song Li cupped his fist lightly and left with a smile. His bearing was extremely good. Not only did he not bully others, but he also admitted that his foundation was not deep enough. It was not that the young masters present were blind and did not recognize a true Buddha. If it were other heroes of the Jianghu, even if they were not deeply grateful, they would inevitably have a good impression of a general who lowered himself and treated them with respect. When Song Li cupped his fist and left, Su Fengyan also put down his teacup and stood up to send him off with his eyes. The diners at the nearby tables were quite frightened when they heard the conversation between the two sides that did not deliberately hide anything. When they looked at Su Fengyan again, their gaze was no different from looking at a complete fool who did not know what was good for him. Walking out of the door, Song Li walked down the steps and asked softly, "Elder Wang, did you identify this person's cultivation?" Wang Fu took out a fragrant porcelain bottle from his sleeve, unscrewed the lid and lowered his head to sniff it. He said darkly, "Strange, strange. This old man purposely leaked some of his killing intent, but this kid did not purposely pretend to be a fool." After noticing it, he immediately stopped twirling his cup, but then there was no more movement. Could it be that he was apprenticed to a Taoist priest since childhood? Otherwise he would not have such composure. Ordinary experts, when attracted by a sudden killing intent, can maintain their posture and pretend to be as steady as Mount Tai. However, the subtle changes in their pupils and the speed of their qi circulation are difficult to hide. However, this old man can confirm one thing. Looking at his continuous gestures of raising, holding, and putting down the cup, this kid must be a person who uses a knife. Song Li smiled. Usually, Elder Wang can kill if you want to, but now is not the same as before. Many things may affect the whole situation. It is better to avoid unnecessary trouble. Wang Fu reluctantly agreed and put away the bottle, as if not killing people was equivalent to accumulating merit and virtue. He said with a smile, "That kid probably doesn't know that he has wandered around the gates of hell." Song Li turned and mounted his horse. Together, 7 or 8 riders rushed to the military town. A few li away, a scout came back with a military report. Over there was a pair of women who were extremely interesting. Not only did they provoke his soldiers, they also did not have the slightest self-awareness. One of them threatened to make him, the general of Hengjiang, suffer the consequences. Song Li was not angry, but he felt that it was a bit chewy. Song Li naturally knew the temperament of his army of tigers and wolves. He raised his soldiers to raise them like jackals and wolves. If they did not eat people, how could they kill people on the battlefield? There were many horse bandits in the forest north of Guangling Road. Among them, there were 6 or 7 horse bandits with more than 100 people. Not only did they kill and set fires unscrupulously, but they also teased the local soldiers as easily as a cat playing with a mouse. Song Li also had an even more ruthless place. After his own soldiers became extremely difficult to exterminate, he sent many new soldiers who were in the dark to fight with them. They fed each other's fighting strength and died in vain. Galloping on the street, Song Li suddenly sighed with emotion. Who would dare to believe that Wang Xinji would die in the hands of that person? Wang Fu, who had always been arrogant, had a gloomy face. If someone did not recognize Lu Huang, who was carrying old monster Wang's corpse, no one would believe it. Song Li smiled and asked, "Then isn't the one surnamed Su the new number 1 in the world?" Wang Fu had never seen others doing well. He sneered and said, "Even if that young vassal king could survive, half of his life would be gone. Every year he would have to consume several furnaces of Wudong's elixirs to keep his life. How could he be the number 1 in the world?" From this old man's point of view, Wang Xinji is most likely dead. In fact, it was Beiliang who sent out all of its elites and some unknown hidden death soldiers that luckily killed Wang Xinji. Song Li smiled indifferently and did not comment. Chapter 11:23. At the inn, Su Fengyin returned to his room. Since he had nothing to do, he let the 9 flying swords fly out of his sleeves. Not only did he not use his qi to control the swords, he did not even have the slightest confidence in them. This was a mysterious phrase that often appeared in the Wu family sword tomb. It was used to explain a higher realm of using qi to control the swords, which was, where the heart is, where the tip of the sword points. The latter was obviously very high quality. It required years of careful nurturing of the swords to nurture the sword embryo with perfect spirit. However, the 9 flying swords spiraling around the room were not only living creatures that had formed sword embryos, but more like enlightened children that had been caressed by immortals. In terms of physical toughness, after the battle with Wang Xinji, Su Fengyin was far inferior to the Vajra realm masters in Jianghu. In terms of qi, the ghost Wang Fu in his wrist was not wrong. Su Fengyin could not compare to those finger Shen realm masters with their own merits. However, the current Su Fengyin could not be judged with common sense. When he killed Zhao Huangqiao, he wanted to go to Martial Emperor City based on his intuition. At first, he was cautious and wanted to go to Mount Hui to find Shenyuan Qingfeng, the Wulin Alliance master, to be his bodyguard. Of course, he wanted to make a big deal with her at the same time. Otherwise, he would not have asked. However, since Shenyuan Qingfeng was unwilling to have an affair with him or Beiliang, Su Fengyin did not force her. However, when he was in close contact with Shenyuan Qingfeng, a top master, and quietly confronted her, Su Fengyin was surprised to find that not only were the flying swords eager to move, he also had an inexplicable heroic spirit. This was not unfamiliar to Su Fengyin. It was the same spirit that himself and Wang Xinji had 800 years ago. They were invincible against the world. In the past, Su Fengyin was aware of this state of mind. However, he did not have the intention or the power to control it. However, after the battle, especially after he left Mount Hui alone and got closer to the Eastern Sea, he often could not suppress some of his unintentional actions. Just like now, the flying swords were flying around without a trace like fish in water. Su Fengyin could clearly sense their joy and even felt that he could converse with them. Su Fengyin muttered to himself, "Buddhism's Mount Sumeru in a mustard seed, and Taoism's heaven and earth hidden in one sleeve. None of them look like it. The mayfly flying sword suddenly spun in front of Su Fengnian's eyes as if it was greeting him. Then it flashed and flew out of the window. Su Fengnian walked out of the house and went downstairs with a calm expression. He left the inn and walked out of the town. In the end, he saw Song Li's figure sitting high on a horse from afar. It seemed that two young women on the post house had gotten into trouble. One of them was tall and full of heroic spirit. Her sword had already been unsheathed. Judging from her posture, she seemed to be from a famous family. She was still a bit away from being able to spit out Gang Chi at the tip of a sword. She was protecting a woman with a graceful figure behind her, who seemed to be a lady from Jiangnan. However, it seemed that she had lost to someone in a martial arts competition. One of her arms drooped down and couldn't stop trembling slightly. That was why she changed her hand to hold her sword. Song Li didn't say anything. The young retainer with the green silk wrapped around his saber slowed his horse's hooves. His attitude was contented. He also unsheathed his saber and spun it gently. The warhorse leisurely circled around the two desperate women. Su Fengnian stood in the shade of an inconspicuous post house. He heard the swordsman, who was obviously a woman from the north, say sarcastically, "I thought that the Guangling underworld wasn't a nest of snakes and rats. After all, even the capital knows that there's a guy called Song Li who keeps on saying that once he has the power of the dynasty in his hands, he will kill all the dogs of the people. Unexpectedly, hearing about him is not as good as seeing him in person. He's just a filthy trash who snatches women from the people." Hearing this, Song Li chuckled and finally said, "Heroine, I have nothing to say about you injuring 20 soldiers with your own ability. However, Liang Meigong then openly made a bet with you. He lost, so we let him go. You lost, so you have to hand over the woman behind you. If you agree to a bet, you must accept your loss. Heroine, your swordsmanship is good, but your gambling character doesn't seem to be much." Hearing this, Su Fengnian prepared to turn and leave. The graceful woman behind the heroine was about to speak when she was stopped by her gaze. She turned her head and stared at Song Li. Song Li smiled and said, "Don't say anything about you losing and you have to come with me. You and I both know that as long as you don't protect me, the woman behind you won't be able to walk more than 3 li in the current world. I am not a good person, but I am an honest person. I can make it clear to the two ladies that as long as she passes through the Song family's gate, I will let her go. I won't touch a single strand of her hair. However, I have to say the ugly words first. The entire Guangling underworld knows that whether or not I touch her body is not important. But in the future she will be considered my woman." The tall and heroic woman sneered and said, "Song Li, do you have the ability to go to the capital and say such shameful words?" Song Li waved his hand on the back of the horse and laughed. "How would I dare?" Song Li gradually withdrew his smile and said, "No matter if it is you or the woman behind you, none of you are pretty girls from humble families. You are probably from a large family in Great Peace City. But since you have entered the countryside, you have to follow the customs. No matter how big the gold branch or jade leaf is, I can eat it without leaving a trace afterwards. So, you should think about it carefully. Don't really annoy me." The sword-wielding woman exhaled and said in a deep voice, "I have come to Guangling underworld to find Zhao Zhu." She had left the capital to travel. Other than wanting to roam the Jianghu alone, she had also prepared to see that young person who liked to build the capital. The woman behind her was her close friend, but the person she was going to meet was a heartless childhood friend. That man who had originally had a bright future seemed to have disappeared from the world for no reason after his family had changed. She had finally found some clues. This time she had gritted her teeth and secretly left Great Peace City. It could be called a rebellious action. If she returned, she would not be able to take a step out of the capital for the rest of her life. Also, this time she had dragged her to see that man. She had not been refused the door. But what was more hurtful was that the man had said that he had already discussed a marriage and was going to take root in that poor little place. The woman behind her did not believe that he would change his mind. The man had arranged a date with the unfamiliar woman who was not as good as her in every aspect. Not to mention the difference in their backgrounds, their appearances, talents, and knowledge were not worth mentioning. But when she saw the man and the village woman standing together, she gave up. Because when she saw the man and the woman who were not a good match, she knew that he liked her. The woman who had practiced the sword for many years under the master of the sword was not as calm as she appeared. The old man beside General Heng Jiang was unfathomable, so she had chosen that young retainer as her bet partner. She was sure that the opponent's blade skills were slightly inferior to her own, but if they really fought, not only would she lose, if that person had not shown mercy, she would have died here. Although it was against her nature to go back on her word, How could she watch her close friend go to that dragon's pool and tiger's den? Just as Song Li himself said, once she crossed his family's threshold, she would lose her clean reputation. No matter what good would it do to have this surplus general of Guangling's local snake be hacked into 1,000 pieces, his property confiscated, and his ancestors exterminated? But she still did not want to reveal their identities. She was not willing and did not dare. Song Li stilled slightly, his eyes burning. Zhao Zhu, the heir of the king of Yanqi? She knew that it was not good and closed her mouth. There would always be men in the world who did not care about rules and liked a woman's identity more than her appearance. Great Peace City was the most virtuous place in the world and also the most corrupt place. She had seen and heard too much about it. Some of the sons of noble families, who could not seduce any kind of beautiful woman, would target those women who were clearly old and lived in deep courtyards. They were proud of them and would privately meet with their friends to use them as a topic of conversation. They would compete to see who had the higher rank of the titled madam that they had tricked. She had heard that this group of scoundrels did not just view women with ebony scrolls as playthings, they even dared to seduce titled madams with jade scrolls and rhinoceros horn scrolls. Hearing the name Zhao Zhu, Su Fengyan, who had already walked a few steps, stopped in his tracks. He raised his hand and plucked a lush willow branch. Su Fengyan did not plan on going close, but he also did not want to stand by and do nothing. Wang Fu thought that he, the second in the world in blade skills, had not acted in the inn because that boy was lucky. Soon he lost his confidence. A willow leaf flashed through the air. Like a knife cutting through tofu, it cut through Liang Meigong's Guangling new blade that was not in its green sheath. The proud young bladesman who had just won against that woman was dumbstruck, his face blank. Wang Fu was the one with the highest realm present, far above everyone else. But he still had to look around before he confirmed that it was the ranger in the shade of the tree that was causing trouble. The reason that Wang Fu had the strange nickname of Ghost Under the Wrist was because of the way he moved his blade. It was as though there were ghosts and gods helping him. He was one of the few people in the Jianghu who could ignore opponents of higher realms. Wang Fu's talent in martial arts was outstanding even among the geniuses. Otherwise, he would not have been able to reach where he was today just by relying on unorthodox methods. Even a swordsman like Chai Qingshan would not dare to say that he could beat Wang Fu for sure, especially in a battle of life and death. Perhaps Wang Fu's chances of winning were higher. Then everyone on the road saw an absurd scene. The unreachable ghost under the wrist. Wang Fu first leaned back on the horse's back, as if he had dodged something. Only then did he have time to reach out and grab his blade. When he leaned down from the horse, he threw his body forward and lightly tapped the horse's abdomen with the tip of his foot. The sturdy warhorse was sent flying sideways. Wang Fu, who was leisurely carrying his blade, and who was actually wielding it, were two completely different people. Although the old man did not pull his blade out of its sheath, when he ran forward, his momentum was like a rainbow. But for some reason, after the old man had only charged out 60 or 70 feet, he was forced back 20 feet. Then he continued to run with one hand on his blade, his head lowered and his waist bent. He did not walk in a straight line, but rather slithered across the sand like a snake. The ghost under the wrist, a master bladesman, was running forward and retreating like a toddler. After repeating this many times, everyone finally realized that the culprit should be that guy in the shade whose face they could not see clearly. But still, no one knew why Wang Fu had to use such a superfluous method to advance. Even Liang Meigong, who had broken his blade, was no exception. Chapter 11:24. When Wang Fu finally arrived within 100 steps of the young man, Wrist Ghost, who was still holding onto the hilt of his saber, saw the young man casually toss away the willow branch in his hand. Without making the slightest movement, the willow branch above the young man's head suddenly straightened, snapped, and fell rapidly to the ground. Coincidentally, the young man caught it with one hand. Wang Fu suddenly stopped in his tracks. It was not only a show of goodwill but also a show of weakness. Wang Fu was different from many top masters in that he had never set foot in Martial Emperor City in his life. After he became famous in his prime, he didn't have the title of Ghost of the Wrist at that time. Instead, he had the title of Wang Buxi, which was mixed with praise and criticism. This was because he would kill anyone he encountered, and the one who survived would always be him, Wang Fu. He would never provoke an enemy who could kill him, so in this life Wang Fu had never lost even once. Even though he had been close to Chai Qingshan for many years, the two of them had never once exchanged martial skills. For more than 10 years Wang Fu had rarely used his saber. But 10 years ago there was a time in Jianghu when he was still carrying the Kof bead, one of the 10 most famous sabers in the world, against a young man. He still retreated without a fight. Not long after that, not only did Wang Fu know who that young man who didn't carry a sword or a saber was, it could be said that the whole world knew. The peach blossom sword god Deng Tea. This time Wang Fu still did not care about the face of top masters and martial arts seniors, and chose not to use his saber. It was not that he thought he had no chance of winning, but once he used his saber, it would be a fight to the death. The two of them met by chance, and there was no irreconcilable hatred between them. If he was facing Gu Jiantang, then the old man would have the impulse to fight regardless of life and death. After all, those who practiced the sword all wanted to climb over Dong Tai's mountain, and those who practiced the saber were Gu Jiantang. As for those who practiced martial arts in general, no one should have the wishful thinking of defeating Wang Xinji. Wang Fu did not believe that Wang Xinji only died at the hands of the young King Su. Wang Fu stood where he was, feeling a little depressed. There were too many young masters in Jianghu. Many of them had died at his hands, but they were like weeds that grew again when the spring breeze blew. The young master that he had underestimated earlier didn't push his luck either. Instead, he twirled the willow branch between his fingers. It didn't seem like he would take the initiative to shake hands and make peace. It was as if he was waiting for Wang Fu to take the initiative to attack. This junior who popped out of nowhere was too arrogant. Wang Fu's thoughts fluctuated several times, but he did not pull out the Guangling saber at his waist. If he really had to fight to the death, he would feel uncomfortable if he didn't bring along his cough pearl knife. Song Li rode forward and came to Wang Fu's side. This extremely daring general had a complicated expression as he slowly said, "No wonder this young master is unwilling to pay attention to me." The cool breeze blew gently, and the dense willow leaves made the shade of the tree seem deep. The young man didn't say anything. Song Li smiled, "Since young master has made a move, I'm not a fool who won't turn back until I hit the south wall. As long as those two women are in the Guangling Taoist realm east of Shizi County, I will promise them a safe journey. How about it?" Song Li couldn't see the face of the man under the shade, but Wang Fu, who was facing a great enemy, saw it clearly. That guy had a faint smile, but it was especially playful. Song Li tilted his head, then suddenly lifted the reins, turned the horse around, and faced the hundreds of elite light cavalry soldiers. He raised his arm, indicating that they should retreat. Although Wang Fu's 5 fingers left the hilt of his saber, he didn't turn around. His body retreated. After the cavalry had gone some distance, Liang Meigong looked at the bleeding wound on General Song Li's cheek. It was a ghastly sight. Liang Meigong carefully asked, "General, should we mobilize 1,000 cavalry to encircle this person?" Song Li didn't nod but asked Wang Fu, "Elder Wang, is 1,000 cavalry enough?" Wang Fu sneered, "1,000 cavalry to kill a wooden stake that doesn't move. No matter how hard the stake is, it's probably enough. After all, no matter how many masters there are in the world, there aren't many immortals like Li Chungang. But do you think that guy will stand still and fight 1,000 of our cavalry?" Song Li didn't fly into a rage out of humiliation. Instead, he smiled and asked, "Why don't we use all 3,000 cavalry and ask Elder Wang to block that person's retreat?" Wang Fu sneered, "Is it worth it for 2 women of unknown origins? Even if we take a step back, the identities of those 2 northern women are probably not simple. Aren't you afraid of getting into trouble after eating them? This isn't like the blood on your face that can be wiped off just because you want to." Song Li sighed, "That's right." Wang Fu probably also realized that he had lost his composure. He shouldn't have taken advantage of his seniority in front of Song Li. He took out the exquisite porcelain bottle that was filled with crushed spices and sniffed it hard. With an amiable expression, he said, "Our emperor still has to worry about Chao Qingyi and be on tenterhooks, afraid that he will suddenly appear at his bedside one day. General Song, this old man knows that you didn't care much about the power of Jianghu in the past and only treated it as raising cats and dogs for fun. However, there are some words that weren't easy to say in the past, but now you can say it. Everyone says that when a man gets angry, blood will splash 10 steps away. Perhaps there will be people who will ask why Chao Changqing was unable to break into the imperial palace so many times, and why the Su family still died of old age after slaughtering their enemies all over the world. This wasn't because the masters of Jianghu were useless, but because Great Peace City not only had Han Diaoxi and Lu Haoshi, but now there was a large group of gatekeepers led by the Wu family's sword tomb. Beiliang was no exception. Su Yanbing, Yuan Zuozong, which one of them wasn't a match for 10,000 people. In the end, it's a matter of whose virtue is 1 foot high and whose devil is 10 feet high. In these 20 years, there have been too many masters who didn't follow the rules and didn't cherish their lives. They all died, not at the hands of armored soldiers, but at the hands of other masters. Speaking of this, Wang Fu, who was under his wrist, joked, Does General Song want this old man to be like a concubine servant girl, guarding your room day and night? Even if this old man is willing, General Song's wives won't be. Song Li gently pressed his thumb on the wound and smiled. Chapter 11:25. At his side was the young woman who was traveling with him. It was only because of her pair of limpid eyes that Song Li had taken a liking to her that she was exempted from the gold and silver that her family needed to pass through the border. She was nothing more than a concubine's daughter, so it was the same as being sold for a high price of several tens of thousands of taels of silver. Moreover, she was able to establish a relationship with Song Li, a popular figure in Guangling Path. It wasn't just the landowning household that was secretly delighted, even the woman was happy inside. Normally, when marrying, one had to pay particular attention to matching social status. How could she have the extravagant hopes of marrying a Hengjiang general conferred by the imperial court? Song Li turned his head, staring at the woman whose name he still didn't know. With a smile, he said, "If you look at this general's wound one more time, I'm going to cut out your eyes." The woman who originally only knew a bit about horsemanship and whose face was slightly pale from the bumps was immediately horrified to the point where her face was devoid of color. The pair of women on the post-house road could be considered to have seen a glimmer of hope at the end of the tunnel. However, when they wanted to go up and express their thanks, that righteous man had already disappeared without a trace in the blink of an eye. The timid woman clutched her chest, breathing heavily. With a wave of lingering fear, she said, "Wuxia, why don't we return to the capital?" The tall woman who returned her sword to its scabbard said quietly, "After we meet Jianghu, I'll send you back." Only upon closer inspection would one realize that she actually had a pair of jade-green eyes. Purple beard, blue eyes, Grand Secretary Zhang. The woman didn't have any facial hair, but her jade eyes were similar. She was also someone from the capital, so her identity wasn't hard to guess. She was Zhang Julu's daughter, Xianxia. Meanwhile, the woman at Xianxia's side was a genuine relative of the imperial family, the most noble woman under the heavens. She admired that Song family's young phoenix, and Xianxia just happened to want to roam the Jianghu, which was why she snuck out from Great Peace City. During the initial stages of their journey south, it was generally like a spring outing. Occasionally there were disturbances, but they were all dealt with by Xianxia's sword arts. Before they entered Guangling Path, they even made a trip to Martial Emperor City to watch the excitement. Because after Wang Xinji left the city, Yu Groom's building, Huang Linya, and the other disciples also abandoned the city and roamed far away. Without anyone to suppress the experts in the city at first, they didn't dare act rashly. However, when it was confirmed that Martial Emperor City had indeed become an ownerless land, there were people who began to stir up trouble. However, soon after, a cavalry army was stationed outside the city, only then did things calm down a bit. However, the inner city walls filled with weapons suffered a calamity. Even with the Wang family's old servant watching over them, there were still a few famed swords and blades missing every day. However, for the time being, not a single weapon inserted on the walls had been stolen. Xianxia had brought her to the Martial Emperor City to relax, but also because she had to personally see the divine weapons on the wall. She practiced the sword, so she stood at the foot of the wall and observed for a full 2 hours, searching for those legendary ancient swords. On the top of the wall, there was the great sword of the Yellow Cottage, the thin sword of the Moth Fish, the sword of the Dongyue Sword Pool, the sword of Thrushimai that was hung by a pair of immortal couples 300 years ago, and the extremely inauspicious Break with June. There was also the strange half-shoulder small-pointed sword of the Guanyin sect of the Southern Sea, and the swords of the 2 sword crowns of the Wu family sword tomb, seriousness and reassurance. There were too many to count. If it were not for the fact that her close friend found it boring, Xianxia could have stayed at the foot of the wall for a day and a night. Each sword represented a peerless swordsman and a shocking defeat. The woman asked curiously, "Wuxia, who was that warrior? Did you recognize him? Did you see him clearly?" Xianxia shook her head regretfully. "No." The woman sighed. "If we were in Great Peace City, we could have repaid his kindness." Xianxia muttered to herself, "After this, there won't be anything to do with Jianghu. If there really is, then it's just people who don't care about their lives dying on the battlefield." The woman suddenly said angrily, "This person is called Song Li. He's really detestable." Xianxia hesitated for a moment, but in the end she did not say it. She had once inadvertently heard her father commenting on the people of Guangling. Among them he had mentioned this Song Li, the prince of Guangling's blessing general. Song Li was actually a chess piece that the imperial court had placed in Guangling's spring snow building a long time ago. But hearing her father's tone, Zhao Yi had also sensed this in the past 2 years, but still did not shed all pretense of cordiality. On the contrary, he valued this person more and more. If he wanted money, food, soldiers, and horses, he would give them all to him without hesitation. However, Song Li did not listen to Zhang Lu's orders. Even Gu Jiantang's Gu Lu, which only existed in name now, had not been able to order Song Li around in the past. Zhang Gaoxiao privately speculated that this Song Li should be called Zhao Li. His backers might be the most powerful elders of the imperial house. These old men who had followed the previous emperor to the north and south and lived a life of war had been silent for too many years. Zhang Gaoxiao's father, the Grand Secretary, had once revealed heavenly secrets to his daughter. He had laughed and said that those old men who were buried up to their necks in the yellow earth had gritted their teeth and refused to step into the coffin because they wanted to wait for the two people outside the door to die first. Later, when the news of Su Zhao's death spread to the capital, Zhang Gaoxiao went to the study that her brothers had treated as a forbidden land. When she found that the person outside the door had died, the father of the person inside the door was not very happy. Instead, he was somewhat lonely. When she left the room and closed the door, she vaguely heard her father say, "Since ancient times, it has been difficult for famous generals and officials to die of old age. Su Xiao has won." Returning to the inn in town, Su Fengnian was not in a hurry to leave. His trip to the Eastern Sea this time was one thing. However, if Guangling Road mistakenly thought that they could take advantage of the situation, he did not mind learning from Chao Changqing and having a good chat with Zhao Yi and Zhao Yuang. As for Song Li, he naturally knew more than Zhang Gaoxiao. In name, Song Li was one of the most popular people in the Spring Snow building. It was even rumored that he had squeezed out Lu Xingxiang's position. In reality, there was no such thing. Lu Xingxiang going to the capital to be assistant minister of the Ministry of War was an open attempt by the court to steal people from him. Song Li was secretly stealing people from the Spring Snow building. However, even Zhao Yi probably only knew part of it. Song Li was not only a chess piece of Great Peace City, he was also the work of the Yan King Zhao Bing. As to who Song Li would be loyal to in the end, only the heavens and earth knew, as well as Song Li himself. Song Li was a chess piece that had been manipulated by many sides. Since he was able to survive on his own, he definitely did not rely on luck to get to where he was today. As expected, he did not come to the inn to make a big fuss. Su Fengnian left the country early the next morning. Actually, on the way to the inn, Su Fengnian would definitely die if Wang Fu could get within 10 feet of him. However, Su Fengnian was even more certain that even if Wang Fu was given 100 years, that guy would not be able to get within 10 feet of him. Because Wang Fu was not Gu Jiantang. The difference of one step was often the difference between heaven and earth. The carriage slowly approached the Eastern Sea. The sound of the tide gradually grew louder. Other than the relic sword box, the items that Su Fengnian wanted to take away from Martial Emperor City would shock the entire world. Chapter 11:26. Because it's 5,000 words, it's a little late. Su Fengnian took in a poor young man as his disciple. Before they could see the Eastern Sea and enter the Martial Emperor City, they encountered a small group of horses that crossed the border and saved a family of orphans and widows. Among them, there was a young man who didn't know the immensity of heaven and earth. He didn't know the immensity of heaven and earth, but he insisted on sticking his head out and almost got stabbed to death by the horse bandits. Su Fengnian casually saved the young man and continued to drive towards the Martial Emperor City. The young man's temperament was lively and lively. For some reason, he set his eyes on Su Fengnian. He probably thought that Su Fengnian was a hero who roamed the Jianghu. He followed the carriage for a few days like a sticky candy. During the run, he couldn't bear to wear out his boots, so he simply took them off and tied them to his belt. The young man's leg strength was not bad. In addition, Su Fengnian's carriage was not in a hurry. It traveled and stopped from time to time. Even if he was left far behind for a short while, the young man would always be able to catch up. Su Fengnian lit a bonfire at the seaside that night. The exhausted young man didn't dare to come near and curled up in a corner to sleep. When the young man woke up the next morning, he found himself lying in the carriage. He carefully lifted the curtain and sat cross-legged against the carriage wall. For a moment he didn't know how to address that young master. He was hesitating whether he should call him hero or mister. It was that young master who took the initiative to ask. After asking 2 questions, the young man shook his head desperately. The third question made the young man even more confused. The young man asked if he wanted to be his disciple. The young man didn't nod his head. He just blushed and said shyly that he couldn't afford the monetary gift. That young master said it didn't matter. Along the way, the two of them became master and disciple. They didn't talk much. The young man was called Wang Sheng. He was born and raised by a fisherman's family by the sea. His parents died while fishing at sea. He and his grandfather depended on each other for survival. After his grandfather died of illness, the young man left his hometown. Since young he was much stronger than his peers. Other than begging, mourning for people's funerals and carrying illegal salt, he had done almost all kinds of jobs that could earn him money. Young Wang Sheng was still at an age where he did not know what shrewdness was. When he learned that his cheap master, who seemed to have fallen from the sky, was going to the martial emperor city, he was so excited that he could not help but chatter. The young man's nature was simple and honest, and he had a pure heart. Although he couldn't tell the depth of a person's character, he was more accurate in distinguishing between good and bad. After spending a few days with his master, he knew that his master was a person who was easy to talk to. He respected him far more than he feared him. However, to the young man's regret, this young master, who seemed to be more beautiful than a woman, did not like to chat. Most of the time he was talking to himself and answering his own questions. After emptying his stomach of the anecdotes of Jianghu, he could only talk about the old sayings he heard from his elders and neighbors. Fortunately, his master, who had lost his peace, did not argue with him. He taught him a set of obscure incantations and soft fist techniques. He could not remember the incantations, which gave him a headache, but the fist techniques were soft and powerless. However, the young man was content with what he had. He was satisfied to be able to practice martial arts. When he left his hometown 2 years ago, he saw an old man selling secret manuals at a stall in the Jian province. He handed over the 3 taels of silver he had saved with great difficulty. The old man was easy to talk to. He opened his bamboo basket and allowed Wang Sheng to choose. Wang Sheng was illiterate, but when he heard the names of the books, they all seemed to be peerless martial arts. It gave him the feeling that if he could master 1 or 2 moves in the book, he would be able to make a name for himself in the Jianghu. In the end, Wang Sheng chose a sword manual. The inexperienced young man did not know much about worldly affairs, but after all, he was not a fool. He quickly realized that the secret manual was fake. However, he was not angry. He kept that nonsensical sword manual in his bosom and treated it as if he had learned 100 words. It was only a day's journey away from the martial emperor city. The sea breeze came and went, easily dispersing the heat of the early summer. The young Wang Sheng grew up by the sea, so he did not feel that the sea breeze was slightly fishy. He only felt that it was familiar and comfortable. It was probably because he had left his hometown for a few years and remembered his deceased relatives. Wang Sheng fell silent. The reason why Su Fengyin did not talk to this disciple was not because he regretted accepting his first disciple or despised him for his mediocre aptitude. It was because he did not know whether to laugh or cry. After interacting with him, he realized that this sturdy young man was actually a girl. What was strange was that her chi flow and pulse did not seem like a girl's at all. In Buddhism, women could not become Buddhas. In Taoism, female Taoists were also very rare. There was a reason behind it. For 100 years, his mother was the only female sword immortal. Going back 300 years, there was only one female sword immortal. If one did not take the sword into consideration, the number of female first-rank experts could be counted with one's fingers. One of the 4 great grandmasters was Fengdu Green Robe. The current Jianghu was more Qi than before. There were Luo Yang and Shenyuan Qingfeng, as well as Wang Xinji's disciple Linya, who he had never met before. The logic behind a woman's appearance was similar to that of a man's appearance. His disciple Wang Sheng's aptitude was actually not bad. However, before and after Su Fengyin started practicing martial arts, he had seen the peak of the Jianghu. An outstanding aptitude was often not good when one was young. When it came to practicing martial arts, one's stamina was very important. With enough stamina there would be many opportunities. Both were indispensable. The reason why Su Fengyin accepted him as his disciple was very simple. Wang Sheng had a wooden sword at his waist. In the first question, Su Fengyin asked Wang Sheng if he was willing to exchange the wooden sword for food. Wang Sheng refused. Su Fengyin then asked if Wang Sheng was willing to exchange the wooden sword for money. Wang Sheng still refused. In the middle of the night, they were only 30 to 40 miles away from the martial emperor city. Su Fengyin did not continue riding forward. Instead, he ordered Wang Sheng to pick up dead branches and light a big bonfire by the sea. The roaring flames shone on the faces of the master and disciple. Su Fengyin gave Wang Sheng half a piece of beef jerky the size of a child's palm. The night sky was bright and full of stars. Wang Sheng lowered his head and chewed the beef. When he looked up, he saw his master staring at the starry sky in a daze. He secretly licked his oily fingers and then pointed to the starry sky. He smiled and said, "Grandpa said that there is a big lantern. On the ground, when people die, the lantern will go to the sky and light up again. Su Fengnian said calmly, there is a saying in my hometown as well. Wang Xing waited for a long time. When he saw his master fall silent again, he said to himself, Master, other than you, I admire the Wulin Alliance leader of Mount Hui the most. Wang Xing revealed a smile and asked, Master, guess who's next? Su Fengnian shook his head. Wang Xing chuckled and said, it's the Martial Emperor City's fist master Lin Ya. Su Fengnian smiled and said, she is the disciple of the world's most powerful person, Wang Xianxia. Moreover, she is a beauty on the rouge list. You are far inferior to her in both aspects. Wang Xing wanted to dig a hole and hide in it. He asked timidly, Master, you know? Su Fengnian nodded. Wang Xing saw that his master did not seem angry. He lowered his head and said, Father and mother always wanted to have a younger brother, but they couldn't. Later they gave up and raised me as a boy. Moreover, we can't afford a dowry and I don't want to get married. Besides, who would want to live with a woman who looks like a man? Just thinking about it makes me depressed. Whoever marries me must be a rapist who did too many bad things in his previous life. The heavens want to punish him for marrying a man in this life. At this point, Wang Xing, who was content with his life, was amused by himself. Su Fengnian tore off a piece of beef and put it in his mouth. He said softly, when you grow up, you will look like a woman. Wang Xing could not help but say, if I look half as good as you, I don't mind living half a lifetime less. Su Fengnian said calmly, go practice for 2 hours. Wang Xing knew that he had said something wrong. He took the wooden sword from his waist and went to the beach to practice with a bitter face. He obediently practiced 6 times, but there were many mistakes and he often forgot the routine. However, from the corner of his eyes, he saw that his master did not care about his stupidity and did not show any strange expression. Wang Xing practiced for another hour before sitting across from his master. He picked up the wooden sword and placed it on his knees. Su Fengnian asked, walking the Jianghu with a wooden sword, don't you find it embarrassing? Wang Xing was puzzled and asked, what's there to be embarrassed about? Su Fengnian did not say anything. Wang Xing smiled happily and said, Grandpa made this wooden sword for me. Even if you want it, I won't give it to you. Su Fengnian, who never called himself master, said unhappily, do you think I want a broken wooden sword? Wang Xing chuckled. Su Fengnian joked, in the future, if anyone is blind enough to fall in love with you, you can take this wooden sword as a token of love and consider it your dowry. Chapter 11:27. Wang Xing remained silent with a bitter face. Su Fengnian said, you think the wooden sword is precious now, but that's because you haven't seen a real good sword. I am going to the Martial Emperor City to get something, and I can give you one when the time comes. However, you can only keep one sword. You decide for yourself. Let me say the ugly words first. I will not bring a poor disciple who only has a wooden sword to wander the martial world. I can't afford to lose face like this. Besides, you won't be able to practice any superior sword arts with a wooden sword. Wang Xing, do you want to use this broken wooden sword to wander the martial world alone, breaking your head and bleeding? You won't be able to make a name for yourself for the rest of your life. Or do you want to accept a famous sword that everyone covets and learn profound martial arts from me? You will make rapid progress on the martial Tao. Don't be in a hurry to answer me. You can tell me your thoughts tomorrow morning. After Su Fengnian finished speaking, he went back to the carriage to rest, leaving behind a disciple who looked as if he was struck by lightning. The next day the fog was heavy at dawn. The majestic Martial Emperor City in the distance fell into the clouds and fog. It was sometimes hidden and sometimes visible. It was like a perilous sea. Su Fengnian walked to the seaside and saw Wang Xing with his eyes closed. He held the wooden sword and pointed at the sea. Probably because he had been holding the sword for a long time, there was a drop of fog on the tip of the sword. Before this, Wang Xing was wholeheartedly focused on practicing the sword. Su Fengnian didn't pay much attention to him and only taught him this ordinary sword stance. She treated it as a peerless martial art and practiced it tirelessly. Others might find it funny, but they also didn't find it funny. Wang Xing finally realized that his master was beside him. He didn't keep the wooden sword and turned to look at his expressionless master. Suddenly, tears rolled down from his eyes. He choked with sobs and said, Master. When a child met a threshold that they couldn't cross, they would naturally plead to their elders. Su Fengnian said coldly, let go of the sword. Wang Xing's expression was bleak. Master, I really want to practice the sword. I want to use the wooden sword to make a name for myself. Because grandfather said that there are people in the martial world who use wooden swords to make a name for themselves. In the future, I will definitely follow master and practice martial arts well. Su Fengyan sneered and said, "There is no such thing as having the best of both worlds. You can't even throw away a broken wooden sword. How can you pick up those good things that everyone covets? 10,000 taels of gold, Jianghu reputation, ranking in the Wushu evaluation, founding a sect. Which one of them is not more precious than your wooden sword? So what if the wooden sword is your grandfather's legacy?" In the Jianghu, there were many newbies who would not hesitate to lose their family's fortune, disown their parents, kill their masters and offer their wives to others, not to mention their family's fortune. You're so inflexible and don't know how to beat around the bush, yet you still want to practice the sword. Towards the end, Wang Sheng could clearly feel his master's stern tone. Although he hadn't known his master for long, he knew that his master had always been gentle and respectful, someone who could make him feel close to her. She didn't know why, but she knew that she had missed out on this master in this lifetime. She didn't need to think about the Jianghu anymore. Her arms trembled and she turned her head away from this master. As if in a fit of pique, she softly sobbed and said, "Master, I don't want to practice martial arts anymore." Wang Xing put away the wooden sword and placed it at her waist. She knelt down and kowtowed 3 times to this master whom she had only known for a few days. When she knelt down and put away the sword, Su Fengyan extended a finger and stopped the droplet of fog that had fallen from the tip of the sword. Su Fengyan looked at the droplet of fog that did not disperse and said softly, "I also practice the sword, but I always feel that I can't compare to many senior swordsmen. For example, Li Chuangong's swordsmanship, Dong Tai's swordsmanship, and Wang Xiaoping's talisman sword." Su Fengyan smiled and said, "But the ones I feel the most sorry for are not them. It's the one called Old Huang and the one nicknamed Wenbushing." Su Fengyan continued, "I've always felt that too many smart and calculative people, no matter how talented they are, no matter how good their swordsmanship is, no matter how expensive the swords in their hands are, they can't be considered true swordsmen." Wang Xing stood up, not knowing what to do. She did not understand what this man who was probably no longer her master was talking about. Su Fengyan flicked his fingers slightly, then stretched out his hand and placed it on Wang Sheng's head. He rubbed it and smiled warmly. "These people are all masters, seniors and old acquaintances. They have given up many things, especially the last ranger who carried a wooden sword like you. He happened to have the same things you want and the same things you don't want." Su Fengyan took a step back and said in a deep voice, "I, Su Fengyan of Bailiang, accept Princess Hohat as my disciple today." Wang Xing was dumbfounded. Su Fengyan said indifferently, "Take the things that Wen Hua gave up back then." Wang Xing was still confused, but at least she knew that her master was still her master. That was enough. As for the names that her master mentioned that she had never heard of before, she didn't think too much about it. She just thought that her master was bragging. The master and disciple headed to Martial Emperor City. "Master, you're not angry with me anymore?" "Yes." "Master, I've heard of the Peach Blossom Sword God and the Wudong Sword Maniac. They are both sword immortal level experts. But who are the others?" "You will know in the future." "Master, I don't know if I should say something." "Then don't say it." Master, I can't hold it in." "Don't be angry if I say it. Although you are definitely an expert, aren't you bragging too much? Do you really know those 2 immortals? Could it be that you have seen them from afar?" "Master, it's okay. I feel that you are the strongest expert in the world." "Master, I heard that there are many experts in Bailiang. General Yuan who uses a saber, General Su who uses a spear, and the new king of Shu who has left Bailiang. Have you seen him from afar? Alright, there is also the young king of Bailiang. He is even more amazing. Alas, he is a vassal. I think you have never seen him before." "Master, I see that you don't have a saber or sword with you. Are you going to Martial Emperor City to buy a suitable weapon to travel the world?" The master and disciple were mostly disciples. Wang Sheng was nagging to himself. The horse hooves and the carriage moved slowly. Finally, they arrived outside Martial Emperor City. The fog outside the city was getting thinner. However, the hundreds of world-famous weapons on the wall were mostly covered in fog. The fog dripped onto the corners of the wall, making the wall stains very deep. The carriage stopped outside the city. Su Fengyan finally spoke to his disciple who was sitting outside the carriage with his legs crossed. "Lift the curtain. Remember not to block the door of the carriage." Wang Xing didn't know why, but he did as he was told. He lifted the curtain and squatted at the side. Su Fengyan sat cross-legged and looked at the open city gate of Martial Emperor City. Wang Xing suddenly opened his eyes wide. He saw his master's sleeves fluttering even though there was no wind. The fog in Martial Emperor City disappeared in an instant. Inside the city, The wall that once symbolized who was the most powerful person in the world began to tremble imperceptibly. Then the trembling became more and more intense. First, a purple color flew out of the city gate and crashed into Su Fengyan's arms. Then, the famous sword yellow cottage, which was stuck on the high city wall, broke away from the wall and crashed into the red sandalwood sword box. Then, 8 swords of different lengths crashed into the box one after another. Su Fengyan sat down with the box in his hands. Wang Xing, who was still holding the curtain, opened his mouth wide. What was going on? On the city wall, hundreds of masterless weapons were trembling at the same time. They seemed to be struggling and resisting. Su Fengyan raised his arm and said softly, "Come." Moth fish slender sword, thrush sword, Jianghu half-shoulder small point from the Guanyin sect of the South Sea, Wu family sword tomb, peace and seriousness, and sword immortal Qin Qingming Sun Buyu from 200 years ago. Swords flew out of the city one after another. Dantian blade, splendid tree blade, Gu Jiantong's master's peeling peck, frost long blade that was invincible 400 years ago, and so on. Swords flew out of the city one after another. The 18 best weapons in the world left the city wall one after another. There was nothing left on the city wall. They went around Su Fengyan and slid into the carriage in an exquisite arc. No matter how fast they flew, they stopped abruptly after passing through the curtain and fell gently. The carriage was stuffed full of weapons. When it couldn't stop, the weapons that came later were nailed into the ground around the carriage. After half an incense stick's time, the 418 weapons on the city wall of Martial Emperor City all had owners after leaving the city. Wang Xing was stunned on the spot. He couldn't think straight anymore. Her master was really an expert who knew a lot of experts. Su Fengyan, at this moment, was like the Jianghu in his hands. The new martial emperor of the Jianghu, the new invincible. At this moment, the martial emperor city, which had just received the shocking news of the city lord's death in Beiliang, finally believed that the young vassal king had indeed defeated Wang Xianji. After this, the whole world had to pinch their noses and admit that the son of Butcher was the new #1 in the world. Chapter 11:28. Wang Xing swallowed his saliva and pointed in the direction of the city wall. He said with a trembling voice, "Master, there are so many people here." Su Fengyan, who was hugging the red sandalwood sword box, asked with a smile, "Are you scared?" Wang Xing muttered with a bitter face, "How can I not be scared?" Su Fengyan said softly, "This time we don't have to run away in a hurry." Outside Martial Emperor City, the city wall was packed with Jianghu masters. Most of them had been hiding for many years. They were sheltering old monster Wang to avoid being hunted by the imperial court. At the same time, they knew better than any other Jianghu people how heavy the dark cloud above their heads was. It made them unable to see the sun and despair. If Wang Xianji didn't die, the Jianghu people wouldn't be able to rise again. This was the biggest principle of the Jianghu for the past 60 years. As time passed, no one thought that the old monster would die. However, not only did Wang Xianji fail to ascend, he was defeated by a young junior and even died in the hands of this guy. This was the most shocking news in the Jianghu in the past 100 years. It was even more unbelievable than when Li Chuangang's wooden horse and ox were broken by Wang Xianji. There was no lack of experts on the city wall. If any of them were to be thrown into the Jianghu, even if they hadn't used their name for many years, as long as they returned to the Jianghu, those sects with good memories would take the initiative to avoid them. These genuine experts coveted the weapons on the wall even more than those embroidered pillows. After Wang Xianji left the city, many people heard the news and secretly snuck into the Martial Emperor City. When the news of Wang Xianji's death spread throughout the world overnight, more people rushed to the Eastern Sea. No one would wake up early if there were no benefits. Naturally, they were after the divine weapons of their dreams. They formed their own groups and wanted to rely on each other in the upcoming turmoil. They wanted to live and get a share of the loot instead of dying in the chaotic battle. Originally, as long as any of Wang Xianji's disciples remained in the city, no one would dare to be so impatient. However, the current Martial Emperor City was like a flourishing clan that suddenly lost all its males. All that was left was a house full of helpless young beauties. They were of different shapes and sizes. No matter how picky a man was, as long as he barged into the house and acted fast enough, he would be able to win over the beauties. In the end, a guy suddenly appeared out of nowhere and took all the women. Not only did he not let go of the family's wives and concubines, he did not even leave behind a single servant girl. How could the hungry men who were painstakingly leaning on the wall to look at the beautiful spring scenery behind the wall endure this? Everyone on the city wall was ready to make a move, eyeing covetously. However, no one was willing to take the lead in the beginning. This was what it meant to sacrifice one's friends rather than oneself. However, they were afraid that no one would make a move. By the time that guy turned around and left, no one had the courage to stop him. Finally, a man jumped down from the city wall with an unsheathed long and narrow saber in his hand. With a resplendent radiance, he shouted, "Yen Mountain's king of killing crossbow, please enlighten me." Once someone left the city wall, more than a dozen famous experts were not willing to be left behind. For a moment, the voices of people announcing themselves rose and fell one after another. Fangshan County's Ink Sword Zhou Mu, please enlighten me. Jian Province's Pipa player Su Wangfeng, please enlighten me. Southern Borders Thousand Hand Guanyin Feng Baigu here. Yendang Mountain's unfettered cultivator Situ Hongzhu, may I be so bold as to ask for a fight. I am Mount Yulong's monk Ling Miao, I would like to ask for advice today. More than a dozen experts were full of energy, each with a louder voice than the other. This was only the first group that left the city. Soon, a second group with even more people jumped down from the city wall. Compared to the first group, these men were more reserved. Most of them jumped down from the city wall without making a sound. When the first group of experts almost touched the ground and ran forward, the second group was still in the air, but the third group began to jump down in a single file. It was like a curtain of a cascading waterfall, decorated with large and small pearls. This dazzling and magnificent scene was destined to be passed down in Jianghu for a long time. Wang Xing put down the curtain and sat closer. He said in a low voice, "Master, many of them are famous heroes and devils. Even I have heard of them." Su Fengyin nodded and smiled, "Then I will tell you some you haven't heard of." Su Fengyin looked in one direction and calmly said, 60 years ago, the Northwest's #1 swordsman, He Baichuan's sword Elm Pod. His gaze shifted slightly and he continued, Dongyue sword Pool's Song Yanqing's fourth sword, Mo Shangcao. He looked in the third direction. Nanzhao's #1 Wei Miao once wielded the ancient spear, Dragon Winding Beam, to fight in Jianghu for 3,000 li, Jiang Baishi's sword Peeling Peck. Over 100 years, the great frost sword that was used by more than a dozen swordsmen. 2 generations of swordsmen of the Sword Tomb carried their swords in Jianghu and died in Jianghu. Don't worry first, then get serious. Su Fengyin calmly said the names and origins of more than a dozen weapons as if he were counting soldiers on the battlefield. Every time he said one, a weapon would either fly out of the carriage or rise from the ground. Su Fengyin looked around and smiled without saying anything. Today was an eye-opener for the newborn calf Wang Sheng. He no longer wondered why his master could do such an unprecedented feat. If he really wanted a reason, it was very simple. It was his master. Wang Sheng looked at the Jianghu masters rushing over like a tide and quickly reminded his master, "They are only 100 feet away." Su Fengyin chuckled and said, "I am now a paper frame. But the question is, can they get close enough to dismantle me?" Su Fengyin raised his hand and clapped lightly. Chapter 1129. After the applause, not only were there famous weapons such as Elm Pod, Strange Grass, Big Frost and Long Saber, there were more than 20 weapons that had been silent for many years. Every weapon was like a spiritual object of the Shen realm. They either flew at a low altitude, fell in an arc, or wandered in an orderly manner. They found an enemy and flew away. None of the first group of more than 10 people were left behind. The rest of the weapons also did not participate. They just leaped over the heads of the masters and went to find the second group of Jianghu people behind. Su Fengyin no longer cared about the outcome of the battle. He turned his head to look at his disciple's slightly tanned face, which was overflowing with light and color. He explained in detail the root of martial arts in the world. Buddhism's mind-binding ape, Taoism's 3 corpses beheading, Confucianism's noble spirit. These are all talking about forging one's body. To put it simply, a person's body is a battlefield. If an ordinary person catches a cold, he or she can get through it by drinking some hot water and recover by himself. Those with weak bodies need medicine and other external items as reinforcements to rush to the battlefield. Otherwise, the body will be defeated like a collapsing mountain. As for how to refine the body, there are countless methods. But in the end, it's still the 6 paths of skin, flesh, tendons, bones, qi and spirit. Skin, flesh, tendons and bones are easy to understand. Except for some people who are born with supernatural strength, there is not much difference between ordinary people who practice martial arts. The only difference is qi. There is a saying that one can see the embryo at 3 years old when practicing martial arts. It means that at an early age there is not much dirt on the child's body. It is easy to cultivate the meridians and aperture acupoints. The meridians are like the path of a person's qi, circulating endlessly. Very few masters can circulate qi for 600 to 700 miles in an instant. The aperture acupoints are a person's own paradise. Ancestor Lu once passed down a saying, "Go up the mountain and visit the immortals for 60 years, then the treasure mountain is within oneself." Usually, when talking about a person's talent, he is talking about these two things. Wang Xing listened in a daze, but it was not difficult to understand the metaphor of the meridians as roads. He asked in a low voice, "Master, I have been to many places in the past few years. Generally, the official roads are winding and difficult to walk on, not to mention those small paths. They are not as laborious as the post-house roads for soldiers and horses. Could it be that the qi of the experts is equivalent to taking the post-house route?" Su Fengyin said with gratification, "Exactly. The roads in the suburbs are divided into 5 levels according to the law. The post roads are undoubtedly the fastest way to transmit information. But when you really enter the room of martial arts, you will know that there are no rules. There are many unorthodox ways in Jianghu, taking shortcuts in the flow of qi. In Jianghu, in the 3 sects, there is no difference between the 2 realms. As Jianghu people who are not of the 3 sects but in the Jianghu who are not Jianghu people of the 3 sects as Jianghu people of Jianghu as well. In the Jianghu people. As a Jianghu and Taoist Taoist Taoism. In level Jianghu. While the master and disciple were chatting, the first group of Jianghu heroes saw that the situation was not good and had tactfully retreated. Among them, the 1,000-hand Guanyin Fang Baigu hid countless hidden weapons and was very arrogant. He did not expect that just as he threw out a hidden weapon, his neck would be pierced by the peeling peck saber. This strong man from Nanjiang held his neck with both hands and staggered a dozen steps before falling to the ground and dying. A middle-aged swordsman wearing white had even worse luck. He encountered the frost saber, one of the top 10 famous sabers in the world. He turned and ran, but was still pierced in the back by this divine weapon that had not appeared in Jianghu for decades. His entire heart was smashed. He fell to the ground and died on the spot. On the other hand, the ink-soaked sword Zhoumu was the only swordsman left who could contend with the flying sword Yuing. However, they were only evenly matched. Wang Sheng was puzzled. "Master, why are the masters so worthless? Each and every one of them is similar to the fake secret manual that I bought with a few taels of silver. Is it because master is too powerful?" Su Fengyin did not answer directly. Instead he said, "Wang Xinji once said that even if 9 of the 10 martial arts experts joined forces, he was confident that he could kill all 9 of them. This is the confidence of Wang Xinji as the world's number 1, and also the spirit of a single person who can fight against the world." Wang Xing said with a fascinated expression, "Master, the fist master that I admire, Linya, is also old Immortal Wang's disciple." Su Fengyin made a sound of acknowledgement. Someone on the city wall shouted, "Let's join forces and kill that brat together. Whoever succeeds will take the lion's share. I don't believe that we can't kill one with a few hundred people." Soon, someone else fanned the flames and agreed, "Yes, let's call our friends in the city. With hundreds and thousands of people, we can drown that brat with just a mouthful of saliva." Wang Xing said angrily, "Master, these people are too shameless." Su Fengyin smiled. He stood up and put the red sandalwood sword case upright. With one hand on the case and the other raised high, he said in a low voice, "Please. After the death of a legendary figure like Sheepskin Fur who only appeared once every 500 years, who would care about the 2 halves of the wooden horse ox? What about Peeling Peck, which was once held by Jiang Baisher? What about the 2 sword crowns of the sword tomb?" Jianghu had forgotten. Su Fengyin wanted Jianghu to remember them again. After the word "please," the 9 swords in the case rushed out first and lined up in front of Su Fengyin in a line. The weapons that had rushed to the top of the martial emperor city turned back. The weapons in the carriage and around the carriage bloomed with their own brilliance at the same time. 418 weapons, 418 strands of energy. The qi was soaring. Heaven and earth were moved. More than 400 weapons lined up in a line. In front of Su Fengyin and outside the martial emperor city, there was a line of tide. Who could get close? Chapter 1130. No one dared to leave the martial emperor city anymore. Su Fengyin did not push his luck. He bent his fingers several times and guided several weapons into the air. For example, the elm pod sword was nailed into the ground a few feet in front of the ink-stained sword Zhoumu. The great spear dragon winding around the beam was nailed into the ground in front of a spear master. The slender crimson short sabers flew to the top of the city wall and fell into the hands of a machete man. More than a dozen weapons had new owners. After a brief moment of shock, these people, without exception, cupped their fists and bowed to Su Fengyin outside the city to express their gratitude. This was not only because they were happy about Su Fengyin's gift, but also because they were grateful for his recognition of their talents. Among the crowd, a nameless, thin teenager was the most eye-catching. He had actually obtained the great frost long saber that had been returned to its sheath. After being gifted the saber, the teenager could not control the heavy saber that was as heavy as a living thing. He was dragged by the saber for dozens of steps before falling to the ground. Only then did he hug the great frost long saber tightly and grin foolishly. No one could laugh. The teenager was born in the city. His parents were a pair of top assassins who had retired from Jianghu. A few years ago they had died in a bloody attack by unknown enemies. The teenager ran out of the city with the saber on his shoulder. He told the guy who treated all the masters in the city as nothing that he would follow in the future. As long as he was willing to teach him how to use the saber, he, Lu Yunzhang, would be willing to work for him. Su Fengyan asked for 3 spacious carriages to carry the goods. An old spy of the Whisking Water House who had been hiding in the martial emperor city for many years came out of the water and drove the first carriage. He could not stop crying as he drove. Lu Yunzhang had mingled with people from all walks of life in the martial emperor city since he was young. He was proficient in everything. He was in charge of the second carriage. His disciple Wang Sheng, who had learned how to drive, was in the rear. Su Fengyan sat beside her and continued to talk to her about the basics of martial arts. In addition to the carriage, the old spy also had to take care of 6 horses. The carriage's load was beyond imagination, so horses had to be changed frequently. The 4 people, 3 carriages and 12 horses, along with more than 400 weapons, leisurely drove out of the East Sea. Then, along the southern border of Jingji and Pingfan, they made a small arc. When the team reached the top of the arc, Su Fengyan stood on a mountain near an isolated city pass and looked at the scenery of the south for a long time. Wang Sheng and Lu Yunzhang, who were of the same age, did not get along well. Wang Sheng could not stand Lu Yunzhang's mischievous smile, and he did not behave properly in front of her master. Lu Yunzhang, on the other hand, did not like the pedantic young man. The 2 of them were at loggerheads. As long as they met, they would quarrel non-stop. However, Lu Yunzhang was not most afraid of the Immortal who had given him the saber. In the wise young man's opinion, since the Immortal was an expert of the land of immortals, he naturally would not argue with him. However, the slippery Lu Yunzhang was scared to death of the old man who always liked to whisper to the horses. The reason was simple. The old man was an extremely powerful figure in Martial Emperor City. Rumor had it that he slept in mountains of gold and silver. Even bridegroom Yu had borrowed money from this old man surnamed Lu, who was nicknamed the Old Oil Seller. When Su Fengyan stood at the highest point of the terrain and looked to the south, not far away, Wang Sheng, in addition to the wooden sword at her waist, was also carrying the red sandalwood sword case on her back. She also had 4 swords tied to the city wall with ropes. They were the moose fish sword, the 3-inch sword dogwood, personally forged by the old northern Han Confucian sage Chao Yi, the talisman sword wild crane of the Taoist loose immortal Huang Sishan, and the long sword biting pearl that had once pierced through the abdomen of the emperor of Dongyue. The sword aura was awe-inspiring and cold. It seeped into Wang Sheng's skin and caused her lips to turn purple from the cold. Her master didn't say why she had to suffer, only that she would have to carry another sword on her back in less than half a year. In contrast, Lu Yunzhang was too relaxed and content. He carried the large frost saber all day long to show off, as if he had married a beautiful wife. Even when he slept, he would hug her in his arms. At this moment he was beside Wang Sheng. The youth had been imbued with many of the habits of Jianghu. He also knew that in the sect, seniority was important. Although he and Wang Sheng didn't get along well, he didn't want his relationship with this immortal disciple to be too strained. Lu Yunzhang whispered, "Blockhead Wang, what is our master looking at?" Wang Sheng's lips were tightly pursed. He just stared at his master's silhouette, unwilling to pay attention to the youth beside him. Lu Yunzhang was used to being ignored by this blockhead. He asked tirelessly, "Do you know who that old green-robed swordsman is?" "Let me tell you, his identity is extraordinary. He's called Chai Qingshan, an old sword immortal of the Dongyue sword pool. He's the #1 expert of the Guangling Taoist sect. He was once a guest of Zhao Yi. Even the sword pool's sect master, Song Yanqing, has to call him martial uncle. Otherwise, why would our master return him 4 unfamiliar swords? Of course, it's not that our master is afraid of Chai Qingshan. This is the knowledge between the heroes of Jianghu. Blockhead Wang, you should learn a little." Wang Sheng finally couldn't help but turn his head and stare. "Don't keep saying our master. My master has never acknowledged you as his disciple." Lu Yunzhang reached out and patted the scabbard of the large frost saber. He chuckled and said, "Speak with your conscience. Where can you find such a talented disciple like me? Look at you. You're carrying so many swords, but all of them added together aren't as famous as my saber. Wang Xing didn't want to talk nonsense with him. Chapter 1131. The old spy surnamed Lu was probably done chatting with the horse. He walked over to the two children, squatted down, grabbed a handful of soil in his palm and sniffed it. Everything had its vanquisher. Lu Yunzhang immediately kept quiet out of fear and took the initiative to sew his mouth shut. Wang Xing wasn't afraid of this taciturn old senior, but he couldn't get close to him either. The old man also didn't deliberately win over the two children who were destined to never cross paths in their lives. However, deep in his heart he really envied these two children who were extremely lucky. They might not know how great this opportunity was for the time being. The most powerful vassal of the Liang dynasty, the king of Beiliang. He was also the martial artist who had personally killed Wang Xianxia. The old man sighed softly for no reason. It's like sitting in a glass screen surrounded by the wind. It's really been hard on our general's eldest son these years. Wang Xing didn't hear what the old man was muttering, but Lu Yunzhang's ears were sharp. He couldn't help but squat down and ask, "Old Master Lu, what are you talking about? Tell me." The old man rubbed the soil with both hands and looked into the distance. He said indifferently, "It's a coincidence to meet, but it's also the most difficult to understand. Kid, remember to cherish your fortune. You can't find many people with your good luck in the world." Lu Yunzhang didn't say anything. He sat cross-legged and carried the big frost saber on his shoulder. His hands were casually placed on the scabbard, and his eyes were firm. Then they went straight to the northwest. Along the way no one dared to touch this bad luck. Many of the local first-rate Jianghu sects took the initiative to escort the three carriages. At most, they stood respectfully by the side of the road. When they saw the young vassal on the carriage they cupped their fists and bowed. No matter how old they were, they all did the Jianghu etiquette as a junior. When the carriage drove into River Province, Wang Xing had 8 swords tied to his body. He looked like a hedgehog, which was quite funny. Today, Su Fengyan was sitting in the carriage of the spy surnamed Lu, chatting about the war of the spring and autumn period. The old spy, whose real name had been abandoned for half his life, looked at the northwest wind that was already very unfamiliar to him and laughed softly. He was already 3 dust baskets of yellow dust with 2 dust baskets on his body. I really didn't think that he would be able to come back alive and smell the wind and sand here. As I get older, even if I can dream of this place, the memories of the old people and things will become blurry. Su Fengyan said calmly, "Martial Emperor City is no longer the focus of the southeast spies. Beimeng will soon invade the south. We need you here." The old man nodded. "Even if we take 10,000 steps back, as long as we can die here, it's better than anything else." Su Fengyan smiled and said, "Master often mentioned you when he was alive." The old man lamented, "There are many green mountains and clear waters in the southeast. Although they are warm-hearted, they are cold. On the other hand, in the northwest the sky is cold and the ground is frozen, but they don't feel cold." Su Fengyan smiled and said, "No wonder Master always says that you like to drop bags of books and privately calls you the sour peddler." The old man was stunned for a moment before he burst into laughter. The old man's expression suddenly turned solemn. Su Fengyan waved his hand and said, "Go on ahead. Don't wait for me." A thin old man appeared on the road. He was empty-handed, but his sword intent was so strong that it was almost as strong as Li Chungang, an earth immortal. Su Fengyan got off the carriage and moved forward slowly. The 3 carriages brushed past the old man with an inconspicuous appearance. When Su Fengyan was about 10 feet away from the old man took a step back. Su Fengyan also stopped. Su Fengyan asked, "Tomb Master didn't bring a sword?" The old man with a calm expression did not speak. He just stared at the young man who had turned the Jianghu upside down. The old man finally said slowly, "You're going downhill." Su Fengyan said indifferently, "It's reasonable. Tomb Master has indeed chosen a good place and a good time." The old man smiled and said, "Also, did you choose a good opponent?" Su Fengyan did not speak, but a cold smile appeared on the corner of his mouth. The Wu family sword tomb, the current head of the family, the true owner of the second most famous sword in the world, Su of Gojoseon Wu Jian. An old man who had almost never fought with experts outside the sword tomb, but had become a worthy grandmaster of the sword. To be honest, Su Fengyan was related to the old man. However, when his mother gave up her identity as the sword crown and violated the rules of the Wu family, the sword attendant aunt's face was slashed by countless sword auras. Thus, she had no choice but to wear armor. Su Fengyan did not have a good impression of this old man who his mother said liked to go to the Sword Tomb Mountain year after year to count, wash, and sharpen his swords. Li Chungang had once gone to the Sword Tomb to obtain the wooden horse and ox sword. Dong Tai was the illegitimate son of the Wu family. He had once lived and died on the Sword Mountain. In the end he established his own sect, raised his own flying sword, and became the Peach Blossom Sword God. The top swordsmen of 2 generations had not been able to bypass the Sword Tomb where countless famous swordsmen were buried. Perhaps because Li Chungang was in front of Dong Tai, the old man on the road could not be called the number 1 swordsman. However, there were not many people who could let their guard down. In the past, only Wang Xianji could. Su Fengyan, who had defeated Wang Xianji, could naturally do it as well. However, he could not do it now. The old man's qi was restrained. He did not have the demeanor of an expert. He smiled as if he was chatting with a junior and asked pleasantly, "You asked me why I did not bring my sword?" Su Fengyan frowned but quickly felt relieved. The old man finally took a step forward. When he came, his sword came. So what if he did not have the Su of Gojoseon? Chapter 1132. The 3 carriages were ordered to stay away from the disturbance, but they didn't go far. The most experienced old spy quickly stopped the carriage. Wang Sheng and Lu Yunzhang didn't know what was going on, but they did as they were told. 1 old man and 2 young men stood side by side. Lu Yunzhang saw Wang Sheng sweating profusely, his lips turning purple, and his body trembling uncontrollably. Just as Lu Yunzhang was about to laugh at this kid's cowardice, he saw the 7 swords tied to Wang Sheng's body. Each of them was slightly unsheathed, especially Wang Sheng's newest sword, Goose Yellow. It was tied to his waist, and 2 faint yellow sword auras were coming out from the 2 ends of the scabbard. Lu Yunzhang was experienced and knowledgeable. He knew many bizarre stories of the martial world and Martial the Arch City. He roughly guessed why the immortal young master asked Wang Sheng to add a sword every once in a while. It was because he wanted this unnamed disciple to be immersed in the sword aura and gradually connect with those sword embryos. The more the better. Through this, Wang Sheng would be able to hone a natural and vigorous sword intent. The old spy said in a deep voice, "Wang Sheng, try your best to use your divine intent to suppress Goose Yellow's sword aura. If you want to cultivate a superior sword, you have to be able to control the sword and not be controlled by the sword." The pale Wang Sheng tried his best to nod, but it was a pity that he couldn't do it. Goose Yellow's sword aura was getting denser and denser, and the brilliance was lingering around Wang Sheng's waist. The young lady looked like she was wearing a yellow jade belt. The spy with the surname Lu frowned. He knew that these famed swords were attracted by the old man at the post house. Wang Sheng was just a beginner in the sword Dao and naturally couldn't restrain it. The old spy originally thought that by stopping here, he could deliver the weapons to the young vassal king in the shortest time possible and also have enough distance to resist the old man's sword intent. The old spy sighed in his heart. That sword Dao master was too experienced, and Wang Sheng was too immature. Lu Yunzhang asked curiously, "Old man Lu, who is that 50 or 60 years old guy? Is he worth Wang Sheng's and my immortal master's help?" Back then, even Chai Qingshan was polite and didn't dare to put on the airs of a senior in the martial world. The old spy sneered and said, "Regardless of sword intent or sword arts, how can Chai Qingshan be comparable to the person in front of us? He isn't some old man in his 70s, but an old man in his 90s. Lu Yunzhang said in shock, "Even the number 1 person in the dynasty's southeast, Chai Qingshan, can't compare? How many swordsmen in the world can scare people like that? That old man doesn't look like the Peach Blossom Divine Swordsman Dong Tai. I heard that Divine Swordsman Deng is very young. Even if he doesn't carry a Peach Blossom branch, he will probably ride a little donkey in Jianghu." The old spy said in a heavy tone, "He is the tomb master of the Wu family sword tomb. In terms of seniority, your master should call him great-grandpa." Lu Yunzhang was most annoyed by those who practiced the sword in the martial world. They practiced for decades and still didn't have any great achievements. How could they have the spirit to drag someone away with a swing of their saber? Playing with a saber was more enjoyable. However, the Wu family sword tomb was a place shrouded in clouds and fog. The youth had only heard that there was a large group of half-dead withered swordsmen sitting there. The old spy kept sizing up Wang Sheng as he spoke. He saw that her cultivation was still too shallow. Not only was she unable to suppress the eruption of Goose Yellow's sword aura, but the 4 swords of Mothfish, Dogwood, Wild Crane, and Pearl were still relatively quiet. The 2 new swords, Little Dizzy and Youthful Swim, were all showing signs of being completely unsheathed. The old spy felt some regret. This was the first time this child had coincidentally sharpened her sword, but she had failed to face the difficulties head-on. This was especially disadvantageous for her future cultivation. The old spy waited for a moment. He didn't want Wang Sheng and the sword executors to be defeated because of their personal feelings, so he planned to retreat. At this moment, Wang Sheng seemed to be very angry. She lowered her head and stared at the most restless goose yellow. She reprimanded, "Be obedient." Lu Yunzhang rolled his eyes and the old spy didn't know whether to laugh or cry. However, the two of them were surprised to find that the famous sword had indeed calmed down. Most of the sword aura had been withdrawn and returned to its sheath. The remaining sword aura floated up and flowed around Wang Sheng's 10 fingers. The girl's fingertips were like a yellow flower. The corner of Lu Yunzhang's mouth twitched. He said helplessly, "This works too?" Although the old spy's face was calm, he was terrified. In every generation of the martial world, there would be a handful of geniuses. Among these rare geniuses, Buddhism and Taoism were the most mysterious. It was rumored that Qi Xuanzhen had the mysterious ability of prophecy. Back then, on the demon-slaying platform, he had single-handedly fought the 6 skyscraping demons of Zhulu Mountain. 3 of them had died under the great Immortal Qi's incantation. The white-robed monks of the 2 Zen temples were also said to have a secret mantra that could determine one's life and death. As for the people of the Way of the Sword, they could make many famous swords of spiritual Qi feel close to them. They were called natural sword embryos. While the old spy felt relieved, he couldn't help but mock himself. When he was young, he was also regarded by many seniors as having outstanding talent. It was just that he had never been taught by a true master. As a result, he had no interest in instructing others. What he learned was a mixture of different things. In the end, he was unable to go far on the martial path. Regardless of one's aptitude, having a guide often determined one's level of achievement. The old spy hesitated for a moment before saying, "Wang Sheng, follow me for 10 steps. Wang Sheng grunted. Lu Yunzhang said impatiently, "Old Master Lu, what about me?" The old spy said unhappily, "Stay where you are and keep an eye on the carriage." Lu Yunzhang sighed heavily. He turned his head and glanced at the 5-foot-long frost blade on his shoulder. "We'll depend on each other for survival." At the front of the post house, after the head of the Wu family took a step forward, there was no more movement. However, what was even more unexpected was that the old man didn't seem to be in a life-and-death situation. He actually began to ramble and his words were filled with emotion. "My ancestors once said that when I was born, there was a strange phenomenon in the sky. 9 flood dragons were in the sky, and 8 flood dragons took away 9 famous swords from the Sword Mountain. 1 flood dragon coiled around the Sword Mountain, lying on the ancient sword Xianxia. On the first day I started practicing the sword, the ancestor who personally taught me the sword told me that after I pulled out the Xianxia, I had to leave the tomb every 10 years to search for a sword." Chapter 1133. When I was 10, I climbed Sword Mountain in search of a sword and was able to pull out Xianxia. When I was 20, I went deep into the mountains of Liaodong and found Qi Wen at the bottom of a lake. When I was 30, I found Chao Feng in the forest of steels in the wilderness of northern Han. When I was 40, I traveled to West Chu to teach Manjushri and met Bai En on the Buddhist throne. When I was 50, I went to Shu to find Jiao Tuesday. When I was 60, I went to the southern border to seek revenge. I inadvertently saw Yazi nailed to a towering ancient tree. When I was 70, I found a Xia under a stone slab on an ancient bridge in Great An City. When I was 80, I went to the old Dongyue kingdom to visit friends and met Pu Lao inside an ancient bell. When I was 90, I entered Great An City and saw Pai Xiu. Now I have gathered 9 swords. My life should have been complete. When the old man reached this point, he smiled. In this life, other than searching for swords, I have only ever searched for swords. I have never asked why I practiced the sword. Every 10 years, I would ponder how to abandon the sword and obtain its intent. 10 years after 10 years, I have truly missed many people and many sceneries. Su Fengyan raised his head and gazed at the sky. In his field of vision, there was a sea of golden clouds. Sunlight sprinkled down like feathers, gorgeous and moving. Afterwards, the sea of clouds was like a piece of satin that had been ruthlessly pierced through by an awl, creating a slightly slanted opening. Su Fengyan did not move at all. However, a dozen or so famed swords from a carriage flew towards the opening in the sea of clouds. A massive sound exploded in the sky, like the striking of a bell, shattering one's eardrums. One could faintly see that the dozen or so famed swords that had been uprooted from the ground were all broken and fell to the ground. Wind and high spirits flew out from the sea of bamboo in western Shu. With Su Fengyan as the center, they circled around in a large circle, forming a prison and trapping Su Fengyan. Then, sword qi swept out from northern Han, transforming into 10 fragments. Each fragment was a sword, and the 10 swords became one chi. It was as if an immortal was leading the way. A majestic aura came from the northeast. A long rainbow pierced through the sky. With Liaodong as the starting point of the sword momentum and Hezhou as the landing point of the sword momentum, it drew a shockingly huge semicircle. It was wrapped in a stream of water mist, trying to repel the fire. Then a chi appeared from the distant southeast. The sword chi filled with an ancient intent. There was a total of 9 streaks of sword chi, each with their own merits. The old tomb master of the Wu family spent a total of 90 years to find the 9 swords. He did not use the ancient swords themselves to fight against his enemies, but only took the will of the swords for his own use. The old man had indeed chosen a good time to show himself. When he was rushing to River Province, the sword chi had already risen from the ground. If there really was an immortal who could look down on the mortal world from the 9 heavens, he would be able to see the 9 streams of sword chi coming from all directions on the ground, all heading towards the same destination, where Su Fengyan was standing. Su Fengyan had been standing in the same place all along, but other than the red sandalwood sword box on Wang Sheng's back and the 7 bound swords, all the famous swords on the 3 carriages had already flown out of the carriages to fight the enemy. About 300 meters behind Su Fengyan, a large section of the road was torn apart by the thunderclaps. There were 2 places at different heights besides Su Fengyan. One was 70 feet away, while the other was 60 feet away. More than 20 famous swords were destroyed before they could enter Bailiang's territory. There was even a chi that fell from the sky, scattering a cloud of fine powder 4 feet away from Su Fengyan's head. The streaks of sword chi were getting closer and closer to Su Fengyan. They were aggressive. The Yazi sword will with the heaviest killing intent swept over, destroying the 12 ancient swords with Gu Qingjian in the lead. However, the mottled and messy sword chi had already surged to 20 feet in front of Su Fengyan. However, the sword chi that came right after was the most powerful, like a ferocious beast that could swallow all things without spilling out. Su Fengyan spread out his hand and summoned a clothes-tamping sword. The 2 swords perished together. However, Su Fengyan had also retreated 10 feet, but the sword chi had closed in on him by 20 feet. At this moment, the old man still had 2 streaks of sword chi that he had yet to use. One was the sword chi of the pepper diagram that swam around in a circle, and the other was the sword chi of Qianyu that had never appeared. It was obvious that the old man was already 10 feet away from Su Fengyan. On the other hand, Su Fengyan had almost no swords left to use. The 3 carriages had hidden swords, leaving behind only the sword Immortal Qin Qingming's relic, Zibuyu, and an ancient sword of unknown origin. The sword's body was engraved with the words plucked string. Zibuyu hovered behind Su Fengyan, holding the plucked string sword in his hand. He held the sword hilt with one hand and pressed 2 fingers on the tip of the sword with the other hand, pressing the sword's body into an arc. Su Fengyan removed the hand gesture of holding and flicking the sword at the same time, and silently said, "Go." The plucked string sword spun non-stop and disappeared in a flash. Zibuyu also flew behind him. At the same time, the old man who had only taken 1 step forward in the battle finally began to move forward. It was as if he had been patiently waiting for this moment. The man and the sword arrived. This was the old man's 10th sword. If the 9 swords were a gift from God, the old man who had lived for almost 100 years had also practiced 1 sword. In an instant, the old man broke through the 10 feet distance of Su Fengyan's imminent skyline. The 9 treasured flying swords were all deflected by the old tomb lord's majestic sword chi. 2 fingers were pointed at Su Fengyan's forehead. But Su Fengyan's fist was also on the old man's chest. The old man said softly, "Very good." Su Fengyan slowly retracted his fist, somewhat puzzled. The old man said with relief, "At this point, you are still willing to exchange your life for his. Great-grandpa has lost." Su Fengyan didn't know what to do when he heard the strange name. The old man touched Su Fengyan's head with a kind expression and said, "Great-grandpa was worried about others standing here, so he had to come here himself to escort you. I know you won't recognize me as your elder, and the sword tomb has indeed wronged little Su. But nothing can be accomplished without rules. Every family has its own difficulties. Your great-grandpa had no choice but to be the bad guy back then." Su Fengyan's lips trembled, but he still didn't say the 3 words. The old man didn't care. He retracted his hand and took a few steps back. He carefully looked at his great-grandson and smiled. Every family has its own rules. If great-grandpa didn't do this, there would be no reason for me to give you a gift that has been owed for many years. The old man continued, "The Wu family once broke through 10,000 cavalry with 9 swords. Great-grandpa was able to practice the sword himself, but not as the head of the family. Now, not to mention 9 swords, even 19 swords and 29 swords can't break through the 10,000 cavalry of Beimang. Your great-grandpa has never liked Su Xiao, his grandson-in-law, who told him to be so weak in martial arts. Even now, I still feel that this bastard is not worthy of little Su. It seemed that the old man was talking to himself. Su Fengyin, the nominal great-grandson, was silent. The old man laughed heartily. Great-grandpa is very happy to see you. The old man had probably seen enough of this extremely promising and appetizing great-grandson. When he passed by the young man, he patted the young man's shoulder and said, "Don't shoulder everything by yourself." The old man walked away with his back to the stubborn young man who still hadn't called him great-grandpa. One day, more than 100 people will leave the sword tomb of the Wu family and enter Beiliang on horseback with swords. Chapter 1134. After the battle, Lu Yunzhang reluctantly followed the 3 to pick up the broken limbs of the famous swords. The youth really couldn't understand why his immortal master was so fussy about daily necessities like a housewife when he already had such a wealth. Wang Xing wasn't as heartless as Lu Yunzhang, who had a sad expression when picking up the swords. Lu Yunzhang was a swordsman who looked down on swordsmanship, but she was different. She couldn't help but feel sad when she saw dozens of famous divine weapons being destroyed. When Lu Yunzhang threw the last broken sword into the carriage, he caught a glimpse of Wang Xing's absent-minded appearance. He teased that Wang Xing was like a girl but a little too tall and big. Wang Xing angrily reached out and grabbed Goose Yellow at his waist. In an instant, a sword aura was formed, and it couldn't be underestimated. The bold Lu Yunzhang wasn't afraid at all. He grinned, revealing a mouthful of white teeth. His palms spun around the hilt of his frost-long saber. His eyes were blazing as he asked Wang Xing if they wanted to fight. Whoever won would be the first disciple of his immortal master. Wang Xing's face changed, but he didn't speak. For a moment, the young boy and girl were in a deadlock. The old spy couldn't stand such a childish infighting and wanted to punish each of them 50 times to let the 2 brats know the severity of the matter. But he didn't expect that the young lord not only didn't mediate, but also added fuel to the fire. He wanted them to make a vow to fight 3 years later. Afterwards, the old spy privately inquired about the reason. Su Fengyin laughed and said that he deliberately let the 2 children be each other's whetstones. Moreover, he wouldn't hide anything from either side. He would teach them the best swordsmanship and saber techniques in the world. He also wanted to see the outcome of this battle. When the carriage arrived at the border of Yuzhou, Lu Yunzhang heard a rush of galloping horse hooves that he had never heard before. It was a single sound, but it was abnormally heavy. The youth quickly let go of the reins and jumped onto the horse's back. He looked up and saw a scene that he would never forget for the rest of his life. Hundreds of elite cavalry were all white horses and white armor. They wore cold sabers and carried powerful crossbows. The movement of the horses' backs was exactly the same as the movement of the horses' hooves. No wonder they were galloping on the road. The horses of Beiliang and the cold sabers of the Su family were treasures that the other lords of Liang coveted. Lu Yunzhang couldn't be compared to the ignorant Wang Sheng. The martial emperor city was filled with crooks and honest people. The curious Lu Yunzhang had a rough understanding of the affairs of the Jianghu and the imperial court. Along the way to the west, the youth roughly guessed the identity of the immortal young master. However, as a Jianghu youth who lived in the streets of the Eastern Sea, he didn't know the scenery of the northwest frontier fortress. He also couldn't imagine the magnificence of the cavalry of the northwest Su family. Now that he saw it with his own eyes, the youth had the most intuitive impression. He felt that if he was given a few thousand cavalrymen, no matter how many experts there were in the martial emperor city, he would be able to crush them a few times. For a moment the youth was a little dazed. He felt that if he were to practice his saber behind closed doors, it would be better to go to the border and practice a saber that could kill people. Half of the 800 white horse cavalrymen arrived. When they saw Prince Liang, they dismounted and knelt down. Su Fengyin casually glanced around. Most of them were new faces. This wasn't strange. Back then, most of the cavalrymen were his trusted aides and had infiltrated into the various armies. Especially those who had followed him to the Iron Gate Pass to assassinate Prince Zhao Kai. Most of them had high official positions. Although their official ranks weren't high, they had some real power in their hands. Some of the young people who had shown outstanding performance on the battlefield, such as the ruthless Hong Shuwen, were like carps jumping over the dragon's gate. They had a bright future ahead of them. Su Fengyin raised his arm, indicating for the white horse cavalrymen to get on their horses and continue on their journey. Su Fengyin didn't go straight to the prince's residence in Liangzhou. Midway he turned south to Lingzhou. He only brought Wang Sheng and Lu Yunzhang with him. The old spy followed the white horse cavalryman into Jianghu first. Then they went to Chu Lushan's Fu Shui room for the roll call. Su Fengyan was going to see the Tangerine provincial governor, Su Beiji, whom he had kidnapped from Beimang. The northwest solar terms were connected by spring and autumn. Thus, it was known as the long winter without summer. It wasn't that there wasn't a hot summer season. When it should be hot, it was often much hotter than other places. The ground was high and the sky was close and there was nowhere to hide. Naturally, the sun was fierce. However, it was close to the beginning of autumn, and there was no sign of a cool breeze. This made Lu Yunzhang, who was not acclimatized to the climate, feel a little sick. Wang Xing, who had been tortured by life at the bottom, was still fine. He practiced his sword diligently as usual. Huangnam County, which they passed through on their way south, was where Bailiang's granary was located. The reed stream was continuous and the water was fertile. It was not only the throat of the fortress, but also the waist of the Liangxi corridor. At this time, the middle rice and corn were beginning to be filled with milk and ripened, while the late rice was beginning to grow. The cotton was cracking and spitting out cotton. It was a unique style of Jiangnan beyond the Great Wall. The two children clicked their tongues in wonder. Along the way south, the two children were always more eye-catching than Su Fengyan. One carried a white scabbard broadsword, the other carried a case on his back, and there were 7 or 8 swords tied to his body. They didn't look like young wanderers at all. Instead, they looked like inferior swordsmen. Before the three of them entered the capital of Lingzhou, they met an escort team on the official road that was also heading south. Everyone was riding tall horses, and the carriage was particularly luxurious. It had a banner with the word Lu embroidered on it, and there was a black and gold fish dragon. For some reason, the escort team got into a dispute with a group of foreign scholars. Logically speaking, Bailiang relied heavily on scholars who came to Liangxi. As long as they had some real talent, they would be given an important position. Normal people should avoid them. However, the escort team didn't say anything and beat up the brightly dressed scholars until they cried for their parents. After the pain, their eyes were filled with resentment. Lu Yunzhang was very clear about the workings of the Jianghu. When he saw the banner, he said with envy, "Wang Mutu, open your eyes wide and look. It's the Fish Dragon Gang, one of the top 10 sects in the Jianghu. Although it's not as noble as the Snow Villa by the Spring Deity Lake, and it's not as high and mighty as the Missing Moon House on the great snow plains of Mount Hui, the Fish Dragon Gang dares to accept anyone from the Jianghu. It doesn't matter if you're a bandit or a bandit, as long as you have the ability, you can get a position in the Fish Dragon Gang. Therefore, this gang is famous for having a lot of people and they don't care about anyone. If any of the sects outside of Bailiang provoke the Fish Dragon Gang, even if it's a province away, the Fish Dragon Gang will dare to send 100 or 200 people to kill them. The local government doesn't even dare to fart." Chapter 1135. Su Fengyan did not do anything. Later on, he met Provincial Governor Su Beiji at an old location called the Jianghu Granary outside of Lingzhou City. This granary was once the largest granary in the ancient world. Its scale did not lose out to the 2 imperial granaries in Great Peace City and Guangling Road. The north was Jianghu and the south was Ganlu. The two were known in the world. However, the Jianghu granary had not been used for many dynasties and was completely abandoned. It only had a large frame. When the administrator Li Gongda was the provincial governor of Lingzhou, he had thought about repairing the granary. Unfortunately, no one responded. It was difficult to do it alone, so he could only give up. First, repairing the Jianghu granary required a large amount of silver. Second, moving the grain into the granary required great courage. Furthermore, once the grain entered the granary, it was the same as the government becoming a chicken rib. It was the same as having to spend silver every day to raise the grain. Normal granaries could still exchange new grain for old grain to earn money that could not see the light of day. However, once the Jianghu granary was used again, it was destined to be an important military location that even the young kings had to keep an eye on. Who dared to do anything to this place? Were they tired of living? The newly appointed provincial governor Su Beiji acted alone under these circumstances. He did not hesitate to overdraft the Lingzhou tax and decided to renovate the Jianghu granary. In the eyes of the sly officials, the provincial governor was doing it once and for all, but in the dark, he was biting off more than he could chew. The old foxes in the Lingzhou officialdom did not dare to do nothing in the open, but they secretly set up many obstacles. If the Jianghu granary was really messed up by that rash young man, it would cut off countless people's income. A Jianghu granary could not only take in the entire Lingzhou tax to pay for the salaries of officials and the local military, it could also reduce the price of grain to prepare for famine relief. This allowed the tyrannical private granaries of the people to use natural disasters and man-made to obtain huge profits. From the top to the bottom, from the ranking officials to the odd job workers, they all tacitly worked but did not put in effort. Furthermore, there were often disputes that hindered the progress of the project. Sir Su, who was mocked as the provincial governor of Grain Province, did not fly into a rage over this and did not punish the chicken to warn the monkey. He only borrowed 2,000 armored soldiers from the general of Lingzhou and then asked for 3,000 strong corvée laborers from Huangnam County and Longqing County that he could control. He almost completely ignored the orthodox officialdom in Lingzhou. At the same time, he sent Song Yan to clean up the official granaries in Lingzhou. Once he found that there were illegal actions, he would not make a big fuss. At most, he would remove the official hat and replace it with a foreign scholar with a clean background. Most likely, the Lingzhou officialdom did not suffer unbearable turmoil. However, a small group of insightful people finally realized this and began to frequently go to the much quieter official residence in Lingzhou. The Jianghu granary was heavily guarded. Su Fengyan also did not reveal his identity. He only asked a young military officer to help him pass on a message, saying that the prefect of Bishan County of Yanji County in Yuzhou was an old acquaintance of the provincial governor. Su Beiji, who had been sleeping and eating in the open at the old site of the Jianghu granary, quickly rushed over. He was even more travel-worn than Su Fengyan. The youngest provincial governor in Bailiang history looked exhausted, but he seemed to be in good spirits. After seeing Su Fengyan, he was not surprised and silently walked side by side. This gave the military officer a fright. The construction of the Jianghu granary was in full swing. Su Beiji was seen as the prodigal son of Lingzhou. He raised his sleeve to wipe his dusty face and said as he walked, "The Jianghu granary was the second granary of the Qin dynasty 800 years ago. It was only slightly inferior to Luo Yang's granary. It was called a granary, but in reality, it was no different from a city with both offensive and defensive capabilities. The granary city was 1.5 li from east to west and 2 li from north to south. There were more than 300 granaries and no less than 50 granaries. However, this was not all. When it was renovated, one could clearly see the ancient words carved on the bricks describing the source of the grain, the time it was stored in the granary, and the name of the official who was conferred the granary. Every era of the Qin dynasty had declined, and all of this could be traced. I originally thought that worshipping the past was a bad habit, but after coming to the Jianghu granary, I realized that there were some things that the ancients did better." Su Fengyan smiled and said, "The wisdom of the people has gradually developed and there are both good and bad. Otherwise, the ancestors of Taoism would not have brought up the saying that the saints had abandoned wisdom and that the morals of the world were declining with each passing day. It will be mentioned more and more in the future. There are already very few scholars in Bailiang, but they are still very clever in the officialdom. If you were in Jiangnan where the rich and powerful families intertwined with each other, you would truly not be able to display your talents. Here, after all, there is still the suppression of military officials, and the time for civil officials to raise their heads is, after all, short." Su Beiji sighed and said in a deep voice, "As long as the Jianghu granary is completed, with this year's harvest in the 3 provinces as a source of grain, it will be enough to support the war on the border for 2 years. However, the prerequisite is that the various provinces and counties do not embezzle from one another, and the people withdraw their claws and do not get involved. Otherwise, not to mention 2 years, even half a year is an extravagant hope. Time does not wait for me. Actually, if we can plan slowly, I can even have the local grain merchants go to other provinces to buy grain at a high price to fill the cold. This bit of silver is nothing. Once the war starts, not to mention gold and silver, even land will not be as valuable as ready-made grain. However, 20 years of peace within Bailiang has become their confidence for being short-sighted. It is really laughable. Those who brought their children and grandchildren out of the country have even spread the word that even if the grain in the granary rots to the ground, they will not sell a single grain of good rice to the Jianghu granary at a high price. This reminds me of what Grandpa said about the disputes between neighbors. If you only have 1 cent of silver and your neighbor gets 3 cents of silver, then you would rather everyone not earn a single cent than let the other family get 2 cents more." No matter how angry he was, Su Beiji's tone was always calm and indifferent. Su Fengyan stopped in front of a granary with gray tiles. He said with a slight smile, "Lingzhou is so excited to disgust you, just let them be. However, I can guarantee you that the autumn grain from Liang and Yu provinces will definitely be stuffed into the Jianghu granary. At that time, those fellows who escaped when I was Lingzhou's general will settle the score with you. Anyway, from today onwards, the so-called priceless antiques will follow them out of Bailiang. Take as much as you can, But don't even think about taking one tael of silver or gold or one caddy of white rice out. Su Beiji said with a cold smile without holding back. Wishful thinking, do you think you can do it? If the water is too clear there will be no fish. Which of those generals and commandants guarding the border is not related? Su Fengyin said helplessly, it's better than not doing anything, right? Su Beiji's expression relaxed a little and he nodded. When the vassal king beside him swaggered out of Lingzhou, he did not really touch the bottom line of Lingzhou's officialdom. With the Lingzhou general and his royal highness protecting him, no one really dared to fall out with him. However, when Su Beiji personally took charge of Lingzhou, where dragons and snakes were mixed together, it was hard to avoid touching the bottom line of the local officials and families. Furthermore, Su Beiji was not like Li Gongda, an old man in Beiliang who suddenly became a noble. Even with Song Yin and the four Wang families helping him out and the Lingzhou general helping him, the officialdom had always been complicated and hard to predict. Laws, relationships, clan rules and all kinds of rules were mixed within. They all had conflicts and were a mess. The so-called cutting the Gordian knot with a knife could only succeed for a while and would leave behind a long-lasting disaster. Su Beiji was in the middle of it. As long as he did something he would naturally make enemies on all sides. Qin Shiliang, who had taken care of the salt policy and the transport of grain, was an example. It was not that Qin Shiliang did not have good medicine at that time, but so what if he had a strategy? Didn't he still hit a wall everywhere? Su Beiji sneered in his heart. He had a soft personality and could be bullied by everyone. How could he stand on his own in Beiliang where the people were strong? In Liuzhou, the fourth province of the land of refugees, even if Qin Shiliang successfully defended the city and did not let nearly 10,000 horse gang break through, he was still criticized for being indecisive and soft-hearted. In the future, even if he had the chance to take charge of a territory, he would not be able to make any achievements in local politics. Su Fengyin suddenly asked, the fish dragon gang frequently engaged in border trade. Did they break any rules? Su Beiji said, there are spies keeping an eye on them. Since no spies reported to the provincial governor's office, they probably did not break any rules. After pausing for a moment, Su Beiji frowned and asked, did they break any rules? Su Fengyin shook his head and said, I don't think so. Su Beiji said calmly, that woman surnamed Lu has yet to pay me a visit, probably to avoid arousing suspicion. However, a woman like her, who is not magnanimous, is destined to be the leader of a second-rate gang in a prefecture. She is destined to be the leader of one of the top gangs in Jianghu. Su Fengyin smiled and said, it's not her fault. It's been hard on her. She should have been an ordinary Jianghu heroine. Su Beiji suddenly said, since you came back alive, why don't you hurry back to Mount Qingliang? I've already prepared some thorns for you. Su Fengyin said bitterly, it's useless to bring a thorns and ask for punishment from second sister. Su Beiji's face was filled with undisguised schadenfreude. Then, Su Beiji ordered a large portion of food for the king of Beiliang who had yet to eat. The Jiahe granary had always treated everyone equally with pickled vegetables and steamed buns. Su Beiji and Su Fengyin both squatted down to eat. Lu Yunchang very heroically sat cross-legged with his blade across his chest. He also asked for a jug of the famous green ant wine from Beiliang. In the end he choked on it until his face turned red. Wang Xing carried his case and tied his sword. He could not squat down so he could only stand. Su Beiji smiled and asked, are they all your disciples? Su Fengyin grunted in acknowledgement. Lu Yunchang smiled mischievously and said, this is Lingzhou's lord official. My name is Lu Yunchang and I am from the Eastern Sea's martial emperor city. I am master's eldest disciple. I hope lord official can take care of me in the future. Su Beiji heard the youth's cultured words and dismissed it with a smile. Wang Xing snorted coldly. Su Fengyin smiled and said, they can be considered as my second and third disciples. My eldest disciple is a shepherd boy, but he is still by Su Yanbing's side. Lu Yunchang stared and said, what? Wang Xing is not even the eldest disciple? Immortal master, then why would I fight with Wang Xing 3 years later? Even if we fight, we will only be second. It's meaningless. Su Fengyin said indifferently, drink your wine. The youth drank his wine obediently, showing respect for his master. Su Beiji asked softly, what did Guangling Road say? Su Fengyin said calmly, it will be in the next few days. Su Beiji sighed and said, when the smoke signal rises, does this mean that someone in the Liang dynasty's imperial court is welcoming the last ray of light? Su Fengyin grunted expressionlessly, if the old doesn't go, the new won't come. Chapter 1136. In Longqing County, Zhonghangwu, a general of Huaihua City who had retired to his hometown, died. In the end, a nameless fish dragon gang appeared out of nowhere. Not only did the fish dragon gang take over most of the waterway business in Longqing County, they even relied on smuggling at the border. It was said that they could make money from both sides of the upper echelons of Lingzhou and Yuzhou. The new top 10 sects in Jianghu were full of vigor and were not as lethargic as before. Undoubtedly, Mount Huishanzi was the biggest winner. Not only did they make their moonless house in the Great Snow Plateau enter the top 3, surpassing the declining Longhu sect and the thriving Wudong sect, they stood shoulder to shoulder with the Wu family sword tomb in Lantua Mountain. They also brought the Spring God Lake's Snow Mountain Villa to the sky. Later on, there was the Dragon Palace that was ridiculed as Mr. Nalin's maid in Nanjiang, the new sect in the north, and the Spring Invitation Cottage led by the beauty Xia in the West Shu Bamboo Sea. The Fish Dragon Gang of Northern Liang's Lingzhou, which ranked at the bottom, was the most unexpected upstart. They did not have a top level 1 master as their stabilizing force, nor did they have a deep foundation to show off. However, after a few fights with hundreds of talents in the gang, they had annexed a few gangs from other provinces. There were no longer people who mocked and ridiculed them all day long. The young female gang leader's reputation continued to rise. However, for some reason she rarely showed herself. Most of the time, she was in charge of the affairs of the foreign guests who were suspected of occupying the gang's territory. In the past, Jianghu was full of men and not enough of women. The so-called heroines and fairies were just decorations that could not cause much trouble. However, it was different now. Among the top 10 sects there were 4 female leaders, the leader of Wulin Alliance Shenyuan Qingfeng, the new palace master of Dragon Palace Lin Hongyuan, Xianxia from West Shu, and Lu Narong from the Fish Dragon Gang. They were almost on par with the men. However, among the 4 women, Lu Narong was undoubtedly the most inconspicuous. She did not have the beauty of Xianxia, nor did she have the peak martial arts of Shenyuan Qingfeng. She even vaguely retreated behind the scenes in the Fish Dragon Gang like a puppet. Many locals of Lingzhou couldn't help but feel indignant for him. It had always been the bigger shop bullying the customers. How could there be the logic of the bigger customers bullying the shop? In the famous Nan Xiangzi restaurant in Longqing County, a heroic-looking woman went up alone. She ordered a few signature seasonal dishes and drank wine by the window. The manager was an old man in Longqing County. He had a close relationship with old gang leader Lu, who had already retired. Seeing this young woman who he had watched grow up with his own eyes, he felt sad and sympathetic. However, the old man knew the woman's temperament, so he couldn't show it on his face. He could only ask someone to find a good wine that had been stored in the cellar for many years. He personally opened the mud seal and accompanied the woman to drink a bowl of hot, strong wine. They talked about the Jianghu deeds of old Master Lu when he was young. When the old shopkeeper saw the group of people arrogantly climbing up the stairs, he sighed and silently got up to leave. Every family had its own difficulties, not to mention that the Fish Dragon Gang today was not something that an old wine seller like him could meddle in. The woman looked up and saw that the 3 people were the guests who had joined the Fish Dragon Gang in 2 batches. The burly man in his prime was originally a notorious machete man in Yuzhou who carried a famous knife called zongyi. The old man was one of the top internal experts in Hezhou. He was close to level 2 and had the reputation of being a painter. The young and handsome man was the most powerful of the 3. He was also good at using subtle hidden weapons, which made it impossible for people to guard against him. He was the top Jianghu talent in Gangnam-do. At present, the Fish Dragon Gang claimed to have 4 great masters and 18 guests. The 3 of them were the confidants of the second master, Jiang Zishi. Jiang Zishi, the devil who was born in Nanjiang, had once killed Xian Jinren of a venerated Taoist temple in the south when he was only at level 2. Not to mention Jiang Zishi, who should have been executed in Jianghu. Even Su Dechang, the machete man who carried the zongyi knife, was a tricky character that no one in the old Fish Dragon Gang could compete with except for old Master Lu. In such a gang where all kinds of fish and dragons were mixed, except for an almost invincible woman like Huishanzi, no one could control such a large group of domineering people who were united. The painter Su Kunshan had been in Jianghu for a long time and was a shrewd old man. Although he looked down on the girl from the bottom of his heart, he still called her old Master Lu in a pleasant manner. Su Dechang held the handle of the zongyi knife with one hand and sat down casually with a sarcastic face. He poured himself a glass of wine. At this moment, the Fish Dragon Gang had a large number of people and could be said to be strong and powerful. It was like those guys who were in charge of smuggling at the border and no one knew where they came from. They could even swagger with light crossbows and even the government could only turn a blind eye to it. This group of people were all subordinates of the great master, Fang Gaoqi. However, Fang Gaoqi had never participated in the power struggle of the Fish Dragon Gang. Everyone guessed that this guy most likely had a background in the Bailiang army, so naturally no one dared to provoke him. However, the other three great masters, including Jiang Zishi, were all people of Jianghu who knew their own ins and outs very well. The three of them fought with each other and supported each other. Soon, the nominal gang leader in front of them became a mere figurehead. The young woman could not convince the crowd, so how could she compete with these old men who were well versed in the rules of Jianghu? Not only did she gradually lose her voice, but she was also reduced to being used as a bet by two young guests. After the handsome man sat down, he stared at the woman across the table and asked with a smile, "Narong, today I will have a martial arts competition with Song Chunqiao at Yaohua Lake. Would you like to cheer for me?" Lu Narong's eyes were cold and did not show much emotion. Chapter 1137. Su Dechang couldn't bear to see this little girl's cold appearance the most. He was like many outsiders in the gang. When he first joined the Fish Dragon Gang, he heard that His Royal Highness had visited the gang and had some friendship with this girl called Lu Narong. Therefore at first they restrained themselves and behaved honestly. There were even some who hoped to use the Fish Dragon Gang as a springboard to gain the favor of the new Prince Liang. Plus, they might be able to get an official position in Lingzhou. However, after being in the Fish Dragon Gang for a long time, no one believed that the young prince had much connection with the gang. Even if there was, it was just a short-lived relationship. First, Lu Narong was not a beautiful girl. Second, if she was really a wild sparrow raised by the Lord of Bailiang, why didn't the Fish Dragon Gang come out of the prince's mansion of Liangzhou when the Fish Dragon Gang was about to change its surname? Su Dechang took off his knife and slammed it on the table. Then he picked up a cup of wine and handed it to Lu Narong. He smiled sinisterly. "Gang leader, do you want to drink a toast or a forfeit?" The handsome man smiled and glared at Su Dechang. "Brother Su, how can you be so rude to the gang leader?" Su Dechang put down the wine cup and said with a fake smile, "I don't recognize any gang leader. If it's my sister-in-law, I'll treat it as a big deal." Lu Narong finally asked calmly, "Chi Gume, I heard that the outcome of your martial arts competition with Song Chunqiao decided who I belong to?" The young master who had the demeanor of a famous scholar in Jiangnan said innocently, "Narong, are you angry?" Lu Narong glanced at him and sneered, "Why don't we postpone it for a few days? Since it's a martial arts competition, the more important the person is, the more fun it will be. I'll try to invite the provincial governor of Lingzhou." Chi Gume said with a smile, "Provincial Governor Su is in charge of the affairs of a province and is very busy every day. I'm afraid that Narong won't be able to invite him." Su Dechang crossed his legs, took a sip of wine and sneered, "Gang leader Lu, don't try to puff yourself up at your own cost. Our brothers have already found out everything about the Fish Dragon Gang. Do you still want to have a relationship with a third-class border governor? Even if you don't feel embarrassed, I feel embarrassed for you. Besides, with your mediocre skills, you might as well be a good housewife for Brother Qi. If the Fish Dragon Gang is left to Brother Qi to manage, with Elder Zhang's deterrence, the Fish Dragon Gang will be on the right path. Why didn't you choose the suave and elegant Brother Qi? Are you blind to choose that short Song Chunqiao? He's as black as charcoal." Speaking of this, Su Dechang laughed out loud, his eyes burning with filth. "Song Chun's orifices are a complete mess, but sect leader's skin is still fair. If we meet each other in bed, it will be quite interesting." Lu Narong was about to teach this reckless person a lesson, but Su Kunshan, who had been watching coldly from the side, smiled and tapped the table with his finger. The wine cup in front of Lu Narong's table jumped a foot high, and then under the influence of the leakage of qi, the wine cup stopped. This trick was definitely not something that Lu Narong could do. Chi Gume, who had been observing Lu Narong, suddenly frowned. He saw a flash of brilliance that he had never seen before in the woman's eyes, but it quickly disappeared. Su Dechang turned his head and saw three people, one big and two small, walking up the stairs to the second floor. The one in the middle was even more beautiful than Chi Gume. The two little brats beside him didn't look like normal people either. One of them had his hands lazily resting on a long knife on his shoulder, while the other had a sword tied to his back. They looked funny like a hedgehog. This was a rare scene in Lingzhou. Bailiang was much more boring than the Jianghu outside. Not many people liked to pay attention to fancy gimmicks. It was related to the customs of the people, and most of them were straightforward. Many of the newcomers in the Fish Dragons were not used to it at first. This place was far from the Jianghu of the Central Plains, where people liked to nag for a long time before a fight, talking about who was the master, the reason, the rules, and so on. But here, people often fought when they wanted to. Even if two people didn't like to look at each other, they would pull out their knives and fight to the death. The three unfamiliar faces in front of him were obviously more outstanding. Su Dechang didn't act rashly. There were as many seedlings in Lingzhou as there were hairs on a cow. Maybe he could pee 3 or 4 of them. Although these fops were like dragons swimming in shallow water, not everyone could casually step on them. Su Dechang cast a glance at Su Kunshan, who had a great amount of qi, and the latter nodded confidently. The old man must have recognized that the three strangers' qi activity was ordinary, and they were not elites who could cause them to fail miserably. Su Dechang gained confidence. He twisted his butt and turned around with his chair. He said stiffly, "Get lost, I have already booked the 2nd floor." The young man who looked more aristocratic than Chigume smiled and asked, "Is the fish dragons very impressive?" The young man was asking Lu Nerong. He completely ignored the other three. Su Dechang had a bad temper. He immediately stood up with a grin and picked up the knife on the table. The young man with the knife grinned and said, "Master, why don't I do it? And Wang Sheng, don't fight with me." Wang Sheng snorted. Su Kunshan's expression changed drastically. He quickly gave Chigume a look. Chigume stood up calmly and said gently, "Leader, I still have to rush to the Yaohua Lake to compete. I will take my leave first." Lu Nerong was expressionless. Su Dechang was confused, but he still followed Chigume and Su Kunshan downstairs. On the stairs, the three of them could clearly hear the young man with the knife and the young man with the sword tied to his waist complaining. "Blockhead Wang, sword energy is used to kill people, not to scare people. Didn't you alert the enemy? You made me lose 3 training dummies? No matter how broken they are still dummies. You have to pay. Master, you can be the judge." Su Fengyin ignored Lu Yunzhang. He looked through the window and saw the 3 people walking out of the building. Chigume happened to look up. This young master didn't forget to smile gracefully. Su Fengyin ignored him. He sat at Lu Nerong's table and said softly, "Let's not talk about asking Su Beiji for help. You could have at least talked to Fang Gaoqi of the Whispering Room. It wouldn't have ended up like this." Lu Nerong didn't say anything. Su Fengyin took a clean cup from Wang Sheng and poured himself a cup of wine. Lu Nerong suddenly smiled because for some reason she remembered the scene of this fellow squatting by the well and haggling with the water ruffian back in Yanhui Pass. Chapter 1138. Lu Yunzhang was greatly disappointed with this trip to Longqing County. His immortal master had only freeloaded some wine with that woman and chatted about some trivial matters. There was not even the slightest bit of romance, let alone slaughter the shrimp soldiers and crab generals of the fish dragon gang. Before leaving, Lu Yunzhang had been rambling, saying that the female master of the 10th largest gang in the world had average looks and cultivation. In short, he was fighting for justice for his immortal master. The implication was that if it were him, he would not waste his energy on such a woman. Su Fengyin, who had never been willing to talk nonsense with Lu Yunzhang, spoke his mind for the first time. He said that he was not looking for a wife. It did not matter whether Lu Nerong was beautiful or not. As for Lu Nerong's martial arts aptitude, it did not affect whether she was a heroine in his heart. When Lu Yunzhang heard this, his eyes widened. Was Lu Nerong worthy of being a heroine? Su Fengyin rewarded the youth with a 4-word evaluation. It was like playing the lute to a cow. After that, the 3 of them rushed to Liangzhou. Along the way, Su Fengyin successively taught Wang Xing the rough embryonic form of over 10 sword moves. There were old Huang's 9 sword moves, the old man's 2 sword moves, and Wen Hua's 1 sword move. He allowed her to not ask for a deep understanding and only understood his intentions. He did not deliberately favor Wang Sheng. The moves he taught Lu Yunzhang were all top-notch. He did not even hide Gu Jiantang's Thunder Core. This pair of youths could endure hardships and work hard. They secretly competed with each other, afraid of falling behind each other. When they practiced martial arts, they were obsessed with it. However, it was obvious that Lu Yunzhang's speed of cultivation was much faster than Wang Sheng's. He was already very familiar with the hob and drag blade, and vaguely had the demeanor of a grandmaster. Occasionally, when he listened to Su Fengyin explain the profoundness of sword moves to Wang Sheng, he would be able to comprehend by analogy. On the other hand, after Wang Sheng acknowledged Su Fengyin as his master, for some reason, he became more and more introverted. He was silent and was no longer as naive and unaffected as before. Perhaps it was because of Lu Yunzhang's talent in martial arts that the girl felt a lot of speechless pressure. Su Fengyin was well aware of this, but he did not try to ease the heavy pressure in her heart because of this. As they neared Liangzhou, Su Fengyin rarely took the courier roads. He only chose the paths with few people and had Wang Sheng and Lu Yunzhang take turns to fight. He wanted them to do their best to press forward with their weapons. Compared to the two, Lu Yunzhang was naturally more imposing. With the great frost blade in hand, he dared to fight with his life on the line. He would not even acknowledge the heavenly king. When facing his immortal master, he would never hold back and would always charge forward in a spurt of energy. Wang Xing, on the other hand, was much inferior. Every time he unsheathed Goose Yellow, even if his moves were 60 to 70% similar, his spirit was only 20 to 30%. This was exactly the opposite of Su Fengnian's expectations for her. Over time, Wang Xing also realized the crux of the problem. His originally dark and rough face became more and more stiff. Every time he looked at Su Fengnian's calm expression, he wanted to say something but hesitated. He felt guilty and uneasy. After crossing the Yellow Flower Pass, they would arrive at Liangzhou a dozen miles away. Currently, there were 14 military officers stationed in Beiliang's Taoist realm to guard the 14 passes. From the point to the line, it was proposed by Ancestor Gu, the originator of the situation theory. There was a flintlock for 5 miles, a block for 10 miles, a fort for 30 miles and a city for 100 miles. In the past, Beiliang did not have flintlock forts. On the contrary, they were not shabby in number. However, most of them were disorderly. Once the real war broke out, they might not be able to quickly respond to each other. Now, the number was slightly reduced, but the situation in Beiliang suddenly became clear. The Yellow Flower Pass was one of the 14 passes. It was led by a senior military officer named Li Maozhen, who was an experienced military officer. Li Maozhen was old and wise and was deeply trusted by the old King Liang. Otherwise, Su Xiao would not have let him guard the east gate of Liangzhou. The Huayuan gate of this pass was the favorite of frontier poets of the past generations. This gate symbolized that the imperial court was conciliatory and far-sighted. The dark green city walls that extended out from the two sides of the pass were like a dragon traversing the desert. The dragon's head extended to the north and connected to the red-shooting Wild Goose Mountain. At the top of the mountain was the Een-locking flintlock, which was known as the #1 flintlock in the world. In the past, the Yellow Flower Pass did not exclude people from fairs. Especially on the 1st and 15th of every month, people would come and go. It was unusually prosperous. However, after becoming one of the 14 passes, the Yellow Flower Pass became much more deserted. The trade caravans that passed through the northwest region of the dynasty had to take a detour. There were complaints everywhere. So much so that the weak military officer Li Maozhen sent a memorial to the Qingliang Mountain, requesting to reopen the city gate and military camp. The 3,000 elite soldiers would not need to be paid by Liangzhou and could even be used to support the border army. At that time, Su Fengnian was not in the palace. The Red Hanlin Academy in Wutangan argued about this. In the end, Lu Qingyan, who replaced the Green Ants to enter Wutangan, made the final decision and rejected the old military officer Li Maozhen's memorial. It was said that the old military officer Li Maozhen almost resigned and retired. He openly scolded the old military officer Wutangan for not knowing the cost of living. He even said that they would empty out the palace sooner or later. The old military officer Li Maozhen didn't even let the young feudal lord off. 6 or 7 elite light cavalry galloped out of the Yellow Flower Pass gate, escorting a white-haired old man in casual clothes. The old man stopped his horse at a military camp outside the city and squatted on the ground, sighing. Although Beiliang Road imitated the court's Ministry of Works and established a military camp division to be in charge of all military camps and fields, the old man, who was familiar with the rules of officialdom, thought that this was just a helpless move by the new Prince Liang to settle down foreign scholars. The essence of a military camp was the 2 words land reclamation. Once it was handed over to outsiders, it would only become a tool to make money. However, the old man was an official of Beiliang. How could he really go and wrestle with the Beiliang Palace? Fortunately, the young scholar in the military camp division with the official title of Minister Counselor had not stretched his hands too far. Although he was not familiar with military affairs, his subordinates could be considered competent and dedicated. The new residents who had migrated from Beiliang Road's 4th prefecture, Liuzhou, were also well-behaved and peaceful. Only then did the old man pinch his nose and admit it. Otherwise, he really would have taken the bold action of driving them out of the country with troops. Not long after the old man arrived at the military camp, a few young civil officials rushed over upon hearing the news. Among them, the young man in the lead had an 8th-level embroidered official patch. The 2 behind him were 9th-level quails. Their ranks were not high, but they held real power. The 8th-level official was one of the 6 minister counselors of Beiliang Road's military camp division. His name was Lu Gongren. The other 5 were all at the border. He was the only one in charge of the military camp matters in Liang and Yu prefectures. It was said that this was because the military camp division was wary of Li Maozhen, who was in the bag. Lu Gongren was implicated and had no choice but to remain within the borders. After Lu Gongren arrived here, other than surveying the fields, he had also paid a visit to the Yuji general's residence several times. Unfortunately, Li Maozhen, a military officer with real power, did not give this young man any face. Each time he was met with a closed door. After Bailiang Road's 14 military officers surfaced, it was like a military town. Most of them were new faces. At this time, the arrogant old man who was squatting by the field with his but facing Lu Gongren was the backbone of Yellowflower Pass, the weak military officer Li Maozhen. The old man did not pay attention to Lu Gongren's courteous words. He snorted coldly and did not even raise his head. He sneered, "Sir Lu, you really have the leisure to come here and worm your way into being friends with me. Are you not afraid of delaying the great undertaking of the military camp of 2 prefectures? Or do you think that being familiar with a weak military officer will be beneficial for your future climb in the bureaucracy?" Chapter 1139. When the 2 8th-rank counselor and assistant officials, who were as young as the main official, heard this, they were filled with righteous indignation. They were about to speak when Lu Gongren, whose mouth and tongue were parched, waved his hand. He took a few steps forward and was about to walk to the old man's side when a strong retainer blocked his path with a knife. Lu Gongren smiled. The retainer weighed the pros and cons in his mind. He probably felt that this 7th-rank civil official's eyes were clear and couldn't bring himself to hate him. After hesitating for a moment, he moved aside and allowed Lu Gongren to walk to the side of the field. He sat down next to the old man and shook the collar of his official robe. It turned out that this counselor was sweating profusely. There was dirt under his fingernails and even his official patch was stained with dirt. Li Maozhen's discerning eyes allowed him to catch this flaw with just a glance. He clicked his tongue and said, "Sir Lu, you are a good official. Wearing your official robe to work in the field, who would think that you are incompetent? Or are you afraid that others won't recognize you as a 7th-rank official?" Lu Gongren smiled calmly and said, "Not only is it not cool to work in official robes, it is also cumbersome. However, if I don't wear official robes, I will be chased out of the field by your ferocious troops." Li Maozhen furrowed his brows and didn't make a sound. At this moment, the retainers who had followed Li Maozhen out of the city were somewhat wary. 3 strange people slowly walked over from the side of the field. When the 2 sides were about 10 meters apart, the empty-handed young man smiled and asked, "Are you Li Maozhen?" Li Maozhen, who had been called directly by his name, turned his head and looked at the somewhat familiar face. His heart was in turmoil but he wasn't sure. Li Maozhen was a veteran of Bailiang and naturally remembered the peerless beauty of Bailiang's Wu Wangfei. However, how could the old man believe that the young man in front of him was that him? The young man with 2 youths with swords and knives on his back smiled and said, "Li Maozhen, standing in front of you, you don't curse?" Hearing this ridicule, how could Li Maozhen not recognize this person's identity? He abruptly stood up and was about to kneel in greeting. However, at some point, the scholarly-looking young man had walked over to Li Maozhen's side. He and Minister Counselor Lu Gongren sat on the old man's left and right. Li Maozhen's light cavalry retainers were all startled. Just as they were about to protect the old man, Li Maozhen ordered them to retreat and return to the city. Lu Gongren and the 2 assistant officers of the Army Garrison Division who had been standing all this time were somewhat at a loss. Li Maozhen was so excited that he did not know what to say. The old man was not really stupid. If the king of Bailiang really sat next to him, he would not dare to scold him even if he had 10 times the courage of a bear's heart and leopard's guts. Moreover, when his memorial was refuted, he only said a few words out of anger. He regretted it afterwards. In fact, at that time, if the young king of Bailiang wrote it himself instead of those women in Wutangin, then let alone refuting it, even if the king of Bailiang scolded Li Maozhen to his face, he, as a weak military officer, would not talk back. Li Maozhen, who held great power in his hands, recognized 2 things more than many people. One was Bailiang and the other was the Su family. It did not matter if you were a kitten, a dog, or the head of the Su family after great General Su Shao. As long as you sat in the position of the Lord of Bailiang, Li Maozhen would serve you to the death. The person who came was naturally Su Fengyan. He leaned around Li Maozhen and looked at the 8th-rank official Lu Gongren. He smiled and said, "You should be the minister counselor Lu who once studied at Xianxia Academy. You can continue talking. I'll just listen." Lu Gongren mistakenly thought that this was a local snake that even old General Li was afraid of and that he was the son of a general with a strong background in Liangzhou. However, since he was here, he might as well take the opportunity to explain to the old military officer why Bailiang wanted to draw legs on a snake and set up the military field department. However, before the young civil official could speak, Li Maozhen turned his head and glared at him fiercely. The king is sitting next to you and is personally supporting you. What nonsense are you talking to this old man about? In the future, I will strictly control those subordinates who deliberately make things difficult for the military field department. If you, as the minister-counselor, have any difficulties, you can directly enter the UG General's mansion in the pass. Lu Gongren and the two young officials behind him were stunned. Su Fengyan raised his head and waved his hand. He smiled and said, "Sit down and talk." They sat side by side on the side of the field. Other than Li Maozhen, who was able to maintain a calm expression on his face, the others, including Lu Gongren, were all restless and had an uncontrollable excitement in their chests. In the cultivation of the government, one rank followed another, and the threshold followed the threshold. There was almost no end to it. For the 6 ministers who were the pillars of the imperial court, not to mention the officials from other places, even the officials from the capital who could participate in the court assembly might not be able to get in front of these important figures in their entire lives, much less speak a few words with them. However, other than the Grand Secretary Zhang Julu and Gu Jiantang, the vassal kings who had divided the territory were undoubtedly rarer than these pillars of the dynasty. These scholars who had gone to Liang had long heard of the various deeds of the new Liang prince. He was different from the notorious reputation of the past. The rumors that were becoming more and more intense were mostly the heroic deeds of the young vassal kings. However, even if Su Fengyan was an embroidered pillow that could not be supported as long as he was the master of Bailiang, then he was destined to have a large group of famous heroes on the battlefield such as Chu Lushan, Yuan Zuozong, and Yan Wenwan standing behind him. Su Fengyan saw that they were not willing to speak, so he could only smile and ask, "Official Lu, how many roads have you traveled since you became the minister-counselor?" Lu Gongren said respectfully, "I have been the minister-counselor of the army division for more than 2 months. I don't know how many roads I have traveled, but I have already changed 4 pairs of boots." Li Maozhen said softly, "Lu Gongren, this 8th-level official, is not quite the same as the previous pests in Bailiang. I have investigated his background. Since he took office, he has not bought a private residence or kept a servant. However, I can't rule out the possibility that he is not familiar with the network of officialdom and did not dare to enter the water too early and ruin his future." Lu Gongren did not know whether to laugh or cry. He said in a muffled voice, "Old General Li, are you saying good or bad things?" Su Fengyan said, "With Li Maozhen's bad temper, generally speaking, if he did not directly say bad things about you, then it is considered good things." Li Maozhen smiled softly and nodded. His expression was somewhat self-satisfied. Su Fengyan suddenly addressed him as Old General Li and asked, "Lu Gongren and the other scholars who have just taken up their posts, are they satisfactory?" Li Maozhen grunted and said, "At the very least, within 3 or 4 years, they can be considered honest officials. As for whether they can be called capable officials, compared to those who squatted in the latrine pit and did not shit, they are certainly much better." Su Fengyan said to himself, "This is enough." Li Maozhen suddenly asked carefully, "Your Highness, why don't we switch places? I do not dare to sit in the middle of the main seat. I feel that Your Highness is trying to use peaceful means before resorting to force. Are you going to remove my official hat?" Su Fengyan joked. "Su Xiao said before that you, Li Maozhen, are addicted to being an official, which is why he made an exception and asked the Liang Imperial Court for you to be a 4-man guerrilla general. Now it seems that this is indeed the case." Li Maozhen laughed out loud and said, "If I am not an official, how can I lead troops into battle? I know my own weight, otherwise I would have asked Your Highness for the position of Grand Commander." Su Fengyan said softly, "There will be a lot of fighting coming up." Li Maozhen was stunned for a moment before he smiled knowingly. "According to our old rules, every time there is a big battle, the Su family cavalry must set up 2 temporary vanguard battalions. Why don't you count Li Maozhen in? In any case, the Grand General has promised me that the title of Guerrilla General can be inherited. This old man has no other wishes. The eldest son of the Su family, Li Hosher, is not inferior to me in leading troops. Leaving Yellow Flower Pass to him, Your Highness can be at ease." Su Fengyan smiled and said, "Su Xiao is already dying of old age in his bed. You, Li Maozhen, have 4 generations under the same roof. What are you going to do at the border?" Li Maozhen said in a low voice, "Then let's treat it as one last time helping the Grand General fight at the border. Military advisor Li Yishan once said that we must always let those northern barbarians remember one thing. Where the Su family's gate is where the gate of Liang is.